The story starts with a girl walking quietly through the dimly lit room. Surrounded by old bookshelves and a tall wooden chest of drawers, she holds a small watering pitcher. Holding the small pitcher carefully, she tilts it forward to water the unique plant. Standing near the old window, she notices her pet stepping softly across the floor. She looks at it and offers a gentle morning greeting to the day. The girl suggests to her pet that they should go and find some breakfast. Stepping out through a wooden door, the girl prepares to head into the day. Carrying a backpack, she makes their way through a deep, shadowed alley between the towering buildings. Walking along an elevated, covered pathway, the girl continues through the silent ruins of the city. Vines and overgrown plants cling heavily to the massive concrete pillars. She arrives at a security checkpoint where an automated terminal requests an authentication ID. Stepping up to the scanner, the girl presses her bare hand flat against the glass sensor surface. Instantly, the digital interface flashes to life, displaying her profile picture, confirming her identity as Ushimitsu Seo. It shows that there were 186,9923 total registered users and only one user in faculty. It indicates that Seo's facility operation status is normal with zero contamination. With a series of rhythmic clicks, the mechanical pins along the seam of the giant gate begin to retract one by one. The mechanical barrier slides open, revealing a dark, yawning passage. A vast, industrial cavern opens up inside the massive structure, filled with towering pipes, heavy machinery, and metal walkways. Seo walks entirely alone down a long central bridge. At this point you are probably wondering why she is all alone, so subscribe and let's find out. Stepping through an open doorway, Seo enters a giant storage facility filled with endless rows of tall supply shelves where "already sampled" is written on most shelves. Looking through the stock, Seo reaches up to a high shelf and pulls down a small packaged meal. Holding the box, Seo looks at the label and notes to herself that they will be eating a mega spicy rice curry today. She thinks happily about how this entire section of the shelf will soon be finished. Beside them, the small companion lets out a strained groan as it struggles under the heavy weight of a stacked pile of supply boxes. Seo tells her pet that it is being far too greedy. Returning home from the long trek, Seo carefully prepares for the meal ahead. She climbs inside through the worn window frame, sets down the packed backpack on a solid counter, and carefully pours fresh water from a large container straight into a small kettle. Carrying the water kettle, Seo steps out onto a narrow, high-walled balcony to set up the cooking area. The pet sits happily on the ground, nibbling quickly on a round snack, while the rice curry container sits ready on the ledge next to a small timer dial. Nearby, Seo sits down peacefully, flipping through the pages of a small book. Suddenly, a series of repetitive beeps ring out from the small electronic timer, pulling Seo's attention away from the page. Reaching over, she carefully peels back the lid of the prepared container, letting out a fresh cloud of warm steam. Looking at the prepared meal with a quiet smile, she takes a spoon and gives the warm food a thorough stir. Bringing her hands together in a quiet moment of gratitude, she softly announces that it is time to eat. Then she gently blows on it to cool it down before taking her first bite. As the food settles, a look of intense heat washes over Seo's face, forcing a drop of sweat down their cheek as she realizes just how incredibly spicy the curry turns out to be. Undeterred, she scoops up another spoonful from the box and takes a second bite. Chewing slowly, Seo fans her mouth with a hand, feeling the full, burning kick of the meal. Looking down at the empty curry container, Seo quietly gives thanks for the meal. Slipping into a pair of simple shoes, Seo tells the pet to come along so they can get ready for a trip. Following the outdoor walkway along the overgrown building, Seo opens a heavy door. The girl steps inside the dark room and stands silently in the center of a dense, dimly lit armory. Getting dressed for the journey, Seo firmly zips up a dark, tight-fitting undersuit while the pet watches a tiny metal pin drop to the floor. Reaching back, Seo ties her hair into a short knot, then uses thick, armored gloves to carefully handle a heavy weapon magazine. She looks back with a slight smile and calls out to the pet that it is time to head out. Moving down a stark concrete hallway, Seo approaches a set of elevator doors. Riding inside the elevator capsule, Seo folds her arms calmly as the machinery moves. Activating a wrist-mounted device, a glowing digital map projects into the air, showing a complex layout of organized grid blocks. Looking closely at the data, she calculates internally that at her current pace, she should be able to finish searching Residential District 4 by the end of the week. The elevator doors slide open, and the girl steps out into a dark, ground-level parking garage. Walking past weathered concrete pillars and closed metal shutters, Seo spots a parked vehicle waiting ahead. She walks over to a large tactical truck where her pet is already waiting in the passenger window. After climbing into the driver's seat and shutting the heavy door, Seo starts up the engine. This marks the beginning of a journey into a world where, 50 years ago, everything completely changed. Driving down a wide street, the vehicle moves deeper into the remains of the city. She leaves behind a silent monument to the time when the majority of humankind was wiped out. Seo remains focused on the path ahead while their small companion rides along quietly on their shoulder. A dark history lingers over the quiet landscape, brought on by the sudden appearance of alien life forms that spread around a toxic miasma across the world. The invaders quickly overwhelmed humanity as they swept across the globe. Looking past the shattered remains of a concrete wall, a dark, skeletal form lies completely motionless among the debris. Seo remembers that before anyone knew it, everyone began calling these devastating creatures executioners, leaving behind a ruined world of hollow structures. Arriving at the communal housing inside the 4th residential district, Seo parks the vehicle next to a heavily damaged building. Stepping out into the alleyways, Seo pauses as her mechanical eye gives off a clicking sound, shifting into focus to scan the dark surroundings. Her advanced sight picks up a precise signal. Noting to herself that a response has been detected in exactly one location, an augmented display pops up on the view, showing a cluster of crystal bodies and confirming a 92% contamination rate deep within the ruins. Walking up a flight of concrete stairs, she thinks out loud to her small companion that it looks like they will be able to wrap things up early today. Moving carefully into the building, Seo walks along a dark, narrow corridor. Pausing outside one of the rooms, she notices a slight movement as her pet slips inside a cracked doorway ahead. Stepping through the entrance, the girl stands in the doorway of a completely ruined apartment. Seo stands looking down at the dark, motionless creature slumped against the corner wall. A single, sharp eye suddenly opens on the face of the dark creature. In a flash, a massive dark arm slashes violently through the air, wiping across the space toward him. Moving with fast reflexes, Seo presses a weapon directly against the attacking monster. With a sudden bang, a bright blast shoots, hitting the target straight on and blowing it backward. Looking at the damage in the quiet room, Seo realizes with regret that she carelessly let her guard down during the encounter. As they stand there, her mouth looks injured, letting out a sharp hiss and a low groan. The terrifying truth remains that the toxic miasma released by the executioners is inhaled by regular humans. She completes her previous thought by saying that infected by the strange disease, the victims died swiftly. The horrifying affliction is known as crystallosis. It causes blocky, mineral-like crystalline structures to aggressively break out and form directly on the victims' bodies. The heavy clusters are completely consumed by regular humans like the man and woman sealing their features in stone-like growth. The tragic reality is that no treatment for this condition exists. Looking over the collection of sketches left behind, Seo notes internally that the canvases are nothing but portraits of this woman. Stepping closer, Seo silently inspects a message written on the bottom of a frame, expressing a heartbreaking wish to paint her so that she may live on even a little bit longer. Startled by a gentle sensation, she blinks as her pet reaches out to lick the cut on her cheek. Seo softly reassures the small creature that she is all right, giving thanks for the quiet comfort. She requests a quick check to see if there are any survivors left in the area. Deciding on the next course of action, Seo calmly reaches down to her tactical belt with an armored hand, firmly drawing a large combat blade from its sheath. Approaching the tragic scene, Seo uses the heavy blade to begin cutting into the blocky minerals covering the victim's body. With the heavy task finished, a calm stillness returns to the room. The man and the woman rest peacefully side by side, their faces clear of the blocky structures. Turning around as the pet returns to the room, Seo asks how it went outside. The little creature signals a quiet response, causing Seo to nod in understanding. With a calm expression, she softly offers a word of thanks. Preparing to leave the room, Seo carefully wraps the portrait of the woman in a soft protective cloth and puts it on her back. Zipping the body bags closed, Seo hoists the heavy load onto their back. She quietly announces that it is time to get going. Turning her head slightly to look back one final time, she makes sure everything is in order before leaving the scene behind for good. Inside the apartment, the room falls completely silent once more. The empty armchair and the wooden stool sit abandoned next to the art easel, which still holds the unfinished portrait of the woman. The overarching truth remains that crystallosis is extremely contagious. Anywhere where the infection has spread quickly becomes a place completely unsuitable for human life. Seo reflects on the core purpose of this desolate trek, knowing that the ultimate mission is to purify the crystallosis, make the area fit for human habitation once more, and continuously search for any remaining survivors. Inside the vehicle, Seo sits calmly at the steering wheel while her small companion rests on her shoulder, a digital monitor on the dashboard tracking the passage of time at 1723. With a sudden screech of the tires, Seo notes to her companion that it seems like perfect timing, suggesting they make a little detour before heading back. Bringing the vehicle to a complete stop, she pulls a small supply bag onto their lap, checking the packed contents including a solid thermos container and various small boxes. Seo walks down a narrow concrete alleyway between towering walls, passing an old metal junction box and a mounted wall ladder to explore deep within the silent structures. Climbing a very tall metal ladder on the side of a building, she slowly makes their way up to the roof. Then she stands on the edge of the rooftop to look out at the surrounding city blocks. The reality of the task remains clear, as the current purification rate sits at only 0.002% of the target level. She unwraps a small food bar and takes a solid bite. Looking off into the distance while chewing slowly, a somber thought passes through their mind, reflecting on the harsh truth that she has never met a single survivor during these long searches through the ruins. Seo watches over the massive, crumbling city. Towering skyscrapers, overgrown with wild vines and broken down by time, stretch out as far as the eye can see under the open sky. The resolution remains steady, knowing that the purification work will simply continue tomorrow. The alarm clock proclaims that it is a brand new day. Wrapped under a thick blanket, Seo lies fast asleep on a large couch. Beside her, Seo's pet is also sound asleep under the covers, resting peacefully. The active alarm clock sounds off exactly at 7 o'clock, loudly calling out that it is time to rise and shine. Before the voice can even finish its greeting, her hand comes slamming down heavily on top of the device to silence it. Seo sleepily looks down, thinking to herself that the device is incredibly obnoxious and that he really ought to find a new alarm clock. She glances over as a sudden thought crosses her mind, quietly realizing what today is. She reaches up with one hand to firmly adjust and tighten a long dark tie against the collar of a clean white shirt. Seo prepares the formal outfit. Reaching into a collection of clothes hanging in the closet, she smoothly slides a dark suit jacket off the rack. She stands fully dressed in a formal black suit. Turning slightly, a quiet thought crosses her mind about how uncomfortable the clothes feel, thinking that she will never get used to this outfit. Then she firmly grabs and pinches the back of his pet to wake it up, prompting a couple of sudden groans from the creature as Seo announces that it is about time they got going. Seo steps out into the bright doorway, carrying their pet safely on her shoulder as the creature peers out curiously. High above the ground, the solitary tactical vehicle drives steadily down an empty, elevated overpass looping between towering structures. Sitting firmly behind the steering wheel, Seo drives the large truck smoothly down the deserted streets. The vehicle arrives at a location designated as District 34 Temporary Crematorium, marked by a heavily cracked, rusted stone sign wrapped tightly in overgrown vines. Walking forward completely alone, they approach the large double doors at the main entrance of the abandoned facility. She pushes open the heavy entrance. Stepping inside, Seo looks out across a completely deserted reception room, where cracked, weathered walls and a broken reception desk stand abandoned in the dim light. Turning to look, Seo notices a mechanical presence approaching. A four-legged robot arrives, greeting Seo as Miss Ushimitsu and stating that it has been awaiting her arrival. Recognizing the automated entity, Seo softly addresses it as director. The conversation continues beneath an old sign marking the facility's morgue. Seo speaks up to convey deep gratitude for the director's continuous assistance, prompting the director to warmly respond that it is no problem and simply its duty. Inside the massive storage room lined with endless rows of metallic morgue lockers, Seo stands quietly next to the machine. The director informs Seo that there are 48 people designated for burial this month. She turns slightly and softly announces that it is time to begin. Stepping up to one of the wide metallic lockers, Seo pulls out a sliding tray with a sudden rattle. Inside the open storage space lies a large black body bag. She calmly pushes a long metal gurney carrying the dark body bags, moving through the facility as the director accompanies them. They arrive at the crematory hull. Standing before the open furnace slots, Seo wheels the heavy gurney forward, systematically rolling a dark body bag straight toward the interior of the first station. She pushes the metal gurney forward, moving past the numbered furnace stations alongside the director and their small pet. Arriving at the final stations, Seo carefully wheels the gurney into place, aligning the final dark body bags with Station 47 and Station 48. Seo firmly locks the last gurney into position, completing the massive line of preparation. The vast crematory hull stretches deep into the background, revealing a long, endless row of dark body bags. She lifts a telephone receiver from a wall terminal. She speaks into the line to officially request cremation for 48 infected corpses. The automated terminal announces that the request is acknowledged. Immediately below, the massive mechanical shutters of the furnace stations begin to slide downward, sealing the dark body bags completely inside the numbered slots. A rectangular warning sign mounted on the concrete wall suddenly clicks on to indicate that cremation is in progress. Behind the sealed metal gates, a massive sound of roaring flames echoes through the facility as the intense heat takes over the chambers. Sitting quietly inside a booth, the girl rests her chin on one hand and gazes ahead with a gentle smile. As a square mug of steaming hot tea is placed down on the table, Seo looks over at the freshly served drink. The director tells her that the tea in this place is really not the best. She softly notes that she appreciates the gesture. In response, the director kindly replies that Seo is quite welcome, maintaining a calm presence beside the warm tea. The director observes that time passes quickly, adding that it feels like it was only yesterday when they last did this, even though it has been a month already. Listening quietly with a gentle smile, Seo agrees, softly murmuring that time flies. She notes that these funeral rites were originally something performed for each individual. So she sincerely apologizes for not being able to carry that out. The director points out that funerary customs are said to change with time and circumstances. Floating calmly above its mechanical base, the automated entity adds that it believes the way they are doing it now is for the best. It further explains that this facility was built in order to efficiently lay the deceased to rest, serving as an imitation of facilities built in the distant past for victims of natural disasters. The director notes that since there is nobody around anymore who knows how things used to be done, it is especially grateful that Seo assists with ceremonies honoring the dead to the best of their abilities. Hearing this, Seo looks ahead with a gentle smile. Beneath the warning sign indicating that cremation is in progress, the furnace doors slide back up to reveal the results. Seo stands silently at the edge of the station, looking down at the remaining pieces of bone scattered across the long stone tray. She uses long wooden chopsticks to carefully pick up a single piece of bone from the tray. Seo works through the solemn process, thinking to herself that whenever she holds funerals for all these people whose names she does not even know, a profound feeling takes over. Holding a square stone urn tightly in both hands, Seo steps forward to place the container onto a grid-like shelf filled with similar boxes. She reflects silently that the ritual always leaves her deep in thought. A wooden sign is mounted securely to the textured wall, indicating that this area serves as a temporary burial ground for crystallosis patients. Seo thinks that since these folks all died from crystallosis, it is probably not the way they had all envisioned themselves passing on. Seo stands completely still with the director before a pair of towering metal doors. The tall barrier unlocks. Seo watches calmly while a heavy rumbling sound begins to fill the space. A vast, open plain stretches out under the distant city skyline, entirely filled with thousands of simple wooden grave markers that fade into the horizon. Looking out over the endless field, Seo thought that all the people laid to rest here, and all the people who will eventually end up here, would surely feel the same way about their tragic circumstances. She begins working under the open sky, repeatedly thrusting the shovel into the earth. Determined to finish the final rites at any rate, Seo reaches down with both hands to carefully lower a square stone urn into the freshly dug soil, quietly contemplating whether an afterlife does exist for the victims. Seo silently holds a sincere hope that they had all finally found peace on the other side. Seo walks down a long flight of outdoor metal stairs, navigating a deep and shadowed alleyway surrounded by towering, decaying buildings. Emerging from the stairs, she continues her journey on foot, walking down a deserted ground-level path alongside a weathered, damaged building. Looking ahead with a calm and focused expression, a quiet thought crosses Seo's mind as she internally notes to herself that she has finally arrived at the place. She looks up at the massive building, noting its cracked walls, shattered glass windows, and old, faded signs left behind from long ago. Stepping into the dark interior, Seo's advanced mechanical eye suddenly gives off a series of clicks as it shifts focus to analyze the surroundings. Her internal scans reveal that a response has been detected from high above, likely originating from the 15th floor. The elevator door opens before her, and she stands ready to board alongside her pet. The elevator reaches its destination, and the heavy doors open. Seo peers out into a dimly lit, long corridor. Looking at the old ticket booth and the worn posters on the wall, she wonders what kind of place she has entered. Her eyes trace upward to a large old sign where Sunshine Mini Cinema is written above the window. She identifies the facility as a cinema, the ancient term once used to describe a movie theater. She scans the dim space, passing by several old movie posters hanging inside glass frames on the wall. Walking further down the narrow corridor, she approaches a heavy wooden door marked with a small rectangular sign. Her attention is pulled entirely toward the weathered rectangular nameplate mounted on the center of the door, which clearly identifies the space ahead as the projection room. She stands completely still as she spots an unsettling sight further inside. A motionless man rests against a shelf filled with old film reels. His body is heavily overtaken by dark, blocky mineral structures, confirming that he has tragically fallen victim to the relentless crystallosis infection. Then she spots something else. Her attention turns to a large, blocky electronic device resting on a metal rack, and a quiet thought crosses her mind as she notices that the old machine is still running and humming in the dark space. Looking through the window of the projection room, Seo views the large theater auditorium stretching out before her. Her gaze quickly locks onto a lone figure sitting quietly in the middle of the empty rows of seats. Standing near the doorway, a tense thought crosses Seo's mind as she wonders if the person is a living survivor or something else. Seo pushes open the heavy double doors, stepping directly into the main auditorium. Down among the rows of seats, a large mechanical entity sits completely still, holding a heavy weapon in its hands. The mechanical entity turns slightly and speaks with a calm, digital voice, politely requesting Seo to put away her weapon. The strange automated figure then adds that the next movie screening is about to begin. Breaking the silence in the quiet room, she directly asks the mechanical entity who it is. The skull-faced mechanical entity replies to her question. It states that he is simply a film buff. Looking downward, Seo introduces herself to the automated figure. She explains that she is a provisional special investigator from the Ushimitsu Technical Research Institute. Seo details her mission, stating that she looks for survivors to take under her protection, purifies the pathogen responsible for crystallosis, and conducts her ongoing searches with those core goals in mind. The film buff notes that unfortunately she is the very first person to visit the theater since the great disaster occurred. He did not expect to find any more living people left. From its seat, the film buff looks on and calmly observes that it appears the world is pretty much finished. Seo remains hopeful, gently pointing out that it is still possible for survivors to be around, explicitly including the entity in her thoughts. The skull-faced machine looks back at her, clarifying that it cannot be counted as a survivor because it is nothing but a copy automaton. The automaton continues to explain its nature, stating that it is just a machine that had someone's personality data ported over. Pointing out the tragic reality of the theater, the machine reveals that its original body is dead over there in the projection room, heavily overtaken by the blocky mineral growths of crystallosis. Seo reflects on the automaton's explanation, noting that copying over someone's personality is an extremely dangerous gamble to undertake, and she admits she is honestly impressed that the process actually succeeded. The skull-faced machine simply notes that the successful transfer was pure luck. The automaton reflects on the hopeless reality of the disease, noting that there is absolutely no escaping death once someone catches crystallosis. Recognizing the finality of the condition, the man decided that the experimental technology was worth a shot, choosing to attempt the personality transfer even though it was completely unsupported. He continues its explanation, focusing on the heavy industrial build of its current form. Because time was running out rapidly as the infection spread, the man was heavily pressed for time and ultimately had no choice but to quickly copy his consciousness into this mechanical body. The automaton reveals that the shape of its body does not matter much anymore, as long as it remains able to sit in the theater and watch movies. The robot abruptly ends the conversation, stating that it has talked enough and that the show is about to start. Looking toward Seo, the machine invites her to join it for a movie, adding that the upcoming feature is a valuable film made long, long ago, before the Great War. Seo stands silently in the aisle for a brief moment, looking across at the film buff sitting alone among the empty rows. Deciding to accept the invitation, she moves into the adjacent section and smoothly takes a seat. As Seo settles in, her small pet rests peacefully on her lap in front of her tactical chest rig. The ancient history of the feature film hangs in the air, originating from a time over 1,000 years ago, long before the executioners first showed up and well before the Great War tore the world apart. Seo stares ahead as she reflects on the history of the ancient feature film. A deep realization passes through her mind that the movie was created long ago during a time when the Earth was still full of life, well before a devastating war nearly wiped out the entire human race. The large screen lights up in the dark, empty auditorium as the film begins to play. The story focuses on a man who did not have much time left to live, choosing a long journey to visit his brother as his final act in life. The beautiful scenery unfolds across the screen, showing the traveler moving through an open landscape. Most of the movie carefully depicts the details of the man's long trek as he walks past a line of large, old stone windmills stretching into the distance. The movie captures the vast course of the man's journey as a small caravan crosses a wide desert ridge. The scene then transitions to a peaceful town, showing ordinary people passing through a stone archway while the traveler sits quietly on a wooden bench nearby. The video continues to show a vibrant world filled with lush green trees framing a traveler rowing a small boat down a calm river. All of these beautiful sights are things that are now lost to humanity forever. The final segment of the film focuses deeply on the ways these ancient people behaved. The emotional film reaches its peak, showing a powerful scene where the two elderly brothers closely embrace each other. The deep bond, warm affection, and final reunion of these ancient people are all depicted with vivid clarity on the massive screen. Seo watches the touching scene, her eyes reflecting the pale light of the theater screen. The large auditorium falls back into a quiet stillness as Seo continues to watch. She looks ahead with a gentle, thoughtful expression as the movie ends. She breaks the silence to praise the experience, stating that the film sure was incredible. She explains that it felt almost like the people of the past were living there right before their very eyes. The copy automaton adds that even though the film is a work of fiction, it still successfully manages to convey exactly how things used to be in the world. The final thought reminds the viewers that even though those ancient people and their world may be completely gone, they will never truly cease to exist as long as someone remains around to watch their movie. The copy automaton finishes its thought, softly adding that at least, that is exactly what it would like to believe. Standing up from her seat, Seo turns toward the copy automaton to announce that it is about time for her to return to her duties. She offers her deep appreciation, thanking the machine for showing her such a marvelous movie. Looking up from its seat, the copy shares that it is glad she liked the feature, noting that it has been so long since it last talked to anyone, meaning it had a great time as well. Seo informs the copy automaton that there is a shelter nearby that she has been maintaining, directly asking if the robot would like to evacuate there. The machine politely declines the invitation, expressing its thanks for the offer but stating that it will pass. The copy automaton then adds a quiet request, asking Seo if she would be willing to deal with its original body left behind in the projection room. The robot details its final wish to Seo, explaining its desire to remain with the theater until they both eventually meet their end. The copy automaton looks ahead, softly adding that staying behind to face the end will be just like the grand finale of a movie. Preparing to make her departure, Seo bids farewell to the mechanical figure, noting that she guesses this is goodbye. The copy raises its head slightly to respond, letting out a sudden realization as it states that there is still one last thing left to mention before she goes. The robot gives a specific instruction regarding its deceased original body left in the projection room. It tells her to take a look inside the chest pocket of the shirt when she goes to pick up the corpse. Her mechanical glove reaches directly into the shirt pocket of the stone-like body. The copy automaton continues to explain that the pocket contains a storage device holding the data of all the movies it has collected up until the present moment. Holding up the small, rectangular device in her heavy metal glove, the copy automaton explains that there is no longer any point in keeping the item. Seo stands with her pet on her shoulder, quietly watching as the machine advises her to take the data drive along with a projector. The heavy doors slide open as Seo prepares to exit the area, carrying her pet securely on her shoulder. The robot calls out a final piece of advice, encouraging her to try watching a film or two if she ever manages to find some free time. The mechanical figure then promises that it will be praying for the absolute success of her ongoing purification mission. Sitting quietly in the dim theater chair, the copy watches Seo walk away, noting to itself that she was not wearing a protective mask in the toxic environment. The film buff is left completely in thought, wondering internally if humanity has finally discovered some kind of cure for crystallosis, or if she has simply become an artificial life form just like it. As the room falls completely back into a deep stillness, the copy sits alone facing the massive blank screen, concluding to itself that in the end, it really doesn't matter. A simple digital text bubble floats in the center of the blank canvas, formally announcing that the next movie screening is about to begin. Stepping outside through the heavy concrete exit, Seo walks away from the towering, weathered building that houses the hidden theater. She calmly voices her agreement to the day, announcing to her companion that it is time for them to get going. Seo notes to her companion that they will have to figure out exactly where to put the projector after they finally get back home. She shares another detail she learned about the old custom, noting that apparently, movies should always be watched with a tasty snack in hand. She continues her thoughts about their menu, remembering that she is pretty sure she saw a frozen pizza left in the giant storage facility. Carrying a massive body bag on her back with her pet resting on her shoulder, she walks down a heavily ruined street. Seo muses that if they do not have any pizza left, she can try to make something similar using crackers. The tactical vehicle rolls steadily down the empty, deserted street. Sitting inside the driver's seat, Seo looks straight ahead. She observes a large, complex structure rising prominently in the distance, silently questioning if that is the target area designated for today's purification mission. After parking the tactical vehicle at the top of the road, Seo begins her trek on foot, walking down a very long flight of concrete stairs. Seo quietly processes an internal thought, noting to herself that the response is actively coming from somewhere within the area. Arriving at the base of the massive destination, Seo stands completely alone before a set of grand, towering iron gates that seal off the complex structure. She notes to herself that the response appears to be coming directly from the top floor. Seo walks quietly just inside the massive iron gates, looking ahead as her pet peeks out from over her shoulder. The path leads her directly toward a pair of heavy, closed double doors at the entrance of the building. She firmly grabs the metal handle and presses down to unlock the heavy door. She slides the entryway open. Stepping inside, Seo is greeted by a grand, empty hallway stretching deep into the building, lined with numerous closed doors, decorative wall frames, and distant corridors. Observing the detailed furniture, classic table lamps, and elegant vases placed carefully on the wooden cabinets, she reflects internally that this is quite an opulent house. Seo thinks to herself that something about it bothers her, noting that it is something that seems completely off. She continues down a long hallway lined with windows and closed doors. A sudden realization finally hits Seo as she stops before a massive wall of bookshelves. She internally remarks that she has figured out exactly what it is, noting that the rooms, the hallways, and everywhere else share the exact same unsettling trait. Standing calmly alongside her pet, she notes to herself that everything about the massive indoor space is just all too clean. She examines the blooming petals with open eyes and notes to herself with a bit of surprise that this is a real, fresh flower. They look across a quiet, well-organized study centered around a wooden desk and chair placed directly in front of a tall window. She questions internally if the space functions as a study. Seo's pet flops down onto its stomach on the flat surface to inspect a tiny, rectangular electronic item resting under the window ledge. Picking up the small device, Seo identifies it as an audio chip. She unzips her tactical shoulder bag and retrieves a small handheld media player to read the data. She inserts the chip directly into the top slot of the device and prepares to listen to the recorded contents. A quiet static crackle fills the room as the audio playback begins to transmit a recorded message. Seo listens intently in profile while the narrator's voice solemnly details his final moments, lamenting that he has finally contracted the disease themselves after failing to escape the reach of the loathsome miasma. The voice adds with a heavy heart that he feels nostalgia for the days when people said this could mean the end of the human race, noting bitterly that now people have even stopped talking about it entirely. The voice from the recording explains that he exhausted every single possibility while searching for someone who could cure them. Seo's pet stands completely still on the flat surface, listening quietly as the narrator somberly concludes that all of those desperate efforts seem to have been entirely futile. The message reveals that there was once a single researcher who boasted of having discovered a cure. Looking past a framed drawing on the textured wall depicting two individuals inside a study, the narrator notes with heavy regret that just like all the rest, the day eventually came when communications with them completely fell silent. The recording reaches emotional words as Seo stands quietly looking out through the glass window frame. The narrator shares that his sole regret is someone named Claudia, admitting that the painful thought of leaving Claudia all alone is almost more than he can stand. The voice adds that he heavily doubts Claudia will ever play back the audio on this chip, concluding that after all, Claudia would never think to rummage through a master's personal belongings. The playback continues as the audio player displays a generic track title on its small screen. The narrator reflects on Claudia's unwavering dedication that would never betray him, describing it as both very dear and very frustrating. Interrupted by heavy coughing, the voice notes with frustration that he no longer has the luxury of time to blather on and on. The speaker pauses briefly through the audio device, introducing one last thing before concluding the message. Suddenly, a polite voice breaks the silence from a dark corner of the room, offering a quiet apology as someone asks to be pardoned. Startled by the unexpected sound, Seo quickly spins around, as she raises an arm defensively to face the sudden presence. She blinks in surprise as she comes face to face with a mechanical maid standing in the doorway. Looking towards Seo with a gentle expression, the machine notes that she does not believe they have met before, politely asking if Seo might perhaps be a guest. The girl struggles to find her words, while her pet peeks out from over her shoulder. Seo tracks the machine's steady gaze and realizes internally that she is looking at an android. Suddenly, the mechanical maid jumps as a sharp realization hits her, widening her eyes as she wonders silently if it could be true. The android firmly grabs Seo by the hand, demanding to know if she is the doctor. Caught completely off guard, Seo awkwardly hesitates, confusedly trying to explain that she is not who the machine thinks she is. Overjoyed by her own conclusion, the mechanical maid raises an arm in excitement, declaring what a wonderful day it is now that their long-awaited guest has finally arrived. Seo stands awkwardly in the background, as she helplessly attempts to speak up and clarify the misunderstanding. The android notes with delight that Seo even brought a cute little pet along on the journey. As she moves her mechanical fingers closer, Seo's pet suddenly lunges forward and takes a sharp nibble out of her hand. Rather than being upset, the maid smiles warmly in profile, exclaiming how adorable it is for the tiny creature to give her a little bite. The maid happily states that she is absolutely certain her master will be overjoyed by the visit. Seo watches the cheerful display in silence. Realizing that she has gotten ahead of herself, the mechanical maid lets out a sudden gasp. She raises her metal hand to her mouth and clears her throat to reset the conversation. Recognizing how thoughtless she had just been, Claudia softly asks for forgiveness regarding her previous impoliteness. The android announces that her name is Claudia and that she is employed as a servant in this manner. Hearing the name triggers an immediate realization for Seo, who recognizes Claudia from the solemn audio recording she just played. Trying to steer the conversation back to what she heard, Seo hesitantly speaks up to question Claudia about the master she had just mentioned. Claudia confirms that she is referring to the lord of the manor. Smiling gently, the mechanical maid offers to show Seo straight to him. Claudia politely requests Seo to follow her, guiding the way through the building. As they walk along a long, patterned carpet corridor, Claudia explains that the master is currently suffering from his illness and is taking his leave from work. Meanwhile, Seo's pet hitches a ride by safely tucking itself away inside Seo's open tactical waist pouch. Leading the way up a wooden staircase, Claudia pauses to look back at Seo. The android reflects on the past, recalling that it was exactly 8 days before the master began his leave that they first discovered the doctor's existence and scheduled an appointment. Claudia notes that 18,722 days have passed since that time, expressing her pure relief that the doctor has finally made it to the manor safely. The maid speaks aloud, sharing that she is so incredibly happy that she can hardly contain herself. Claudia softly voices her joy, reflecting on how wonderful it is to think that she will finally be able to see the master's smile once more. She opens a large doorway, stepping forward into a new room alongside Seo. She welcomes Seo to their destination. The android gently explains that because the illness has made speaking incredibly difficult for him, she will gladly make introductions in his stead. Claudia introduces the figure seated before Seo as the master of the manor. The man sits completely motionless, his chest, torso, and half of his face heavily overtaken by dense, blocky mineral clusters. Claudia gently places her mechanical hands over her master's crystal-covered arm, smiling brightly as she announces that the doctor has finally come calling, softly promising him that he will be cured of his illness at last. Seo looks down with a calm yet solemn expression as she prepares to deliver the painful truth to Claudia. Addressing the devoted android directly by her name, Seo quietly states that she is not a doctor. She introduces herself as a provisional special investigator from the Ushimitsu Technical Research Institute. She details her true mission to the listening android, explaining that she conducts searches with the goal of finding and protecting survivors. Seo further clarifies that her role also involves purifying the pathogen responsible for crystallosis. Seo gently breaks the tragic reality of the affliction to the faithful servant. She explains that anyone infected with crystallosis is killed by the disease, completely without exception, directly adding that this absolute reality includes Claudia's master. The android questions if what Seo is trying to say is that her master will never open his eyes again. She points out that it seems impossible, considering his face still remains so beautifully preserved despite the strange blocky structures resting on his head. Seo calmly continues her explanation, providing more context about the horrific nature of the disease. She notes that the bodies of those infected with crystallosis do not decompose, clarifying that it is common for a victim to look as though their body is perfectly preserved and they are simply fast asleep. Seo states directly that Claudia's master simply isn't in there anymore. Seo details her official duties, explaining that she needs to follow the proper procedures and bury him respectfully. The devoted servant states that she is afraid she cannot comply with that request. The android insists firmly that her master is most certainly right here with them. She points out that he is simply sleeping, completely no differently from how he normally does during his rest. Reaching down with a sudden movement, Claudia firmly grips Seo by her armored hand. The devoted servant tightens her hold, stating that if despite all of that, the investigator still insists on taking him away, then she has one final request. Claudia presses the gun to herself, asking the investigator to take her along as well. Seo stares in complete shock, completely stunned as she frantically questions what the android is doing. Claudia brings her mechanical hands together over the barrel of the gun, as she explains that if her master leaves her, then she is no longer worth anything at all. Claudia softly questions how a servant without a master could ever be anything more than a mere pile of junk. Facing the investigator with absolute calmness, the devoted android softly asks Seo to please go ahead and pull the trigger. Instead of killing, Seo slowly removes her gun. Seo lowers her gaze in profile, explaining that she has to purify every single instance of crystallosis in order to reduce the level of risk to any potential survivors out there. Walking slowly toward the exit of the room, Seo states from behind that once she has finished purifying the crystallosis everywhere else, she will make her way back here. She promises Claudia that when that day finally comes, she will give her master a proper burial. With a loud click, the heavy wooden door slams tightly closed, leaving Claudia standing completely alone in the silent room. High above the empty, decaying city streets, the skeletal ruins of the weathered mansion stand abandoned under the open sky. Within the quiet rooms, the final lines of the audio recording echo one last time, reminding the silence that Claudia would never think to rummage through her master's personal belongings, leaving the tragic reality forever frozen in time as Seo's pet looks on. The playback continues as the audio player remains firmly held in Seo's gloved hand. The narrator's recorded voice muses on an unwavering dedication that would never betray him, describing it as both very dear and very frustrating. Interrupted by heavy coughing, the speaker notes with frustration that he no longer has the luxury of time to blather on and on. Seo listens silently from behind as the recorded message approaches its final conclusion. The speaker admits that because the listener is an android, he doubts he could ever truly convey this to her, but he still wanted to put it properly into words before offering one last thing. The final, heartbreaking words of the audio chip echo into the quiet morning, as the master softly states that he loves her and that he is sorry. Left behind in the quiet room, Claudia stands in profile with a gentle, serene smile. Turning back toward her motionless lord, Claudia quietly tells her master that their visitor today was not the doctor after all. Gently placing her hand over her master's stone-like, crystal-covered fingers, Claudia tells him to rest assured, promising that even if a doctor never shows up, and even if he never wakes up again. She looks up at her motionless lord, softly vowing that she will always be here with him. Her hands carefully fastens a rope hook to secure the heavy cover over the truck bed. Standing outside the vehicle, Seo assesses the load with her pet on her shoulder, speaking aloud that the preparations should be done. Seo asks her companion if it forgot anything, addressing the creature directly as Ku. Her pet responds immediately with a bright chirp, confirming that it is ready to go. She grabs the door handle and steps into the driver's side of the vehicle, announcing that they should get going. Driving away, the tactical truck moves down the deserted road as Seo notes that they had better stop by and see the director first. In the center of the wall, a tattered gray curtain hangs loosely over a simple glass window. The director acknowledges the situation as it notes that it understands. Seo stands quietly while the director observes that she is setting out today. Seo confirms that she is indeed leaving, explaining that the burial of all the crystallosis-infected bodies in all the nearby areas is finally complete. As plans are made to move on, the thought of heading to the next area brings a quiet admission that things will likely be much more silent around the facility from now on. The director asks if any new information was uncovered regarding the nature of crystallosis or the mysterious executioners. Seo looks down somberly, admitting that this area unfortunately did not hold any clues about them either. Hearing this, the director expresses its disappointment and apologizes for being of so little use to her, though Seo quickly responds to assure the mechanical entity that it is not at all to blame. She expresses her deep appreciation, stating that it is all thanks to the director that the burials always went so smoothly. Seo states that it is too early to say that there are no survivors or clues to be found after all, adding that she will keep on searching at her own pace. The director remains completely silent as it listens to her words. The director advises Seo that she will likely encounter other operational cremation facilities during her upcoming travels. The mechanical entity explains that even though it cannot confirm anything due to communications being down, it highly recommends paying a visit to any facility she finds, since there may still be valuable information left inside. Hearing the helpful guidance, Seo pauses quietly before offering her sincere thanks to the director. Standing alone, the director raises a small mechanical arm to wave a quiet farewell. The heavy tires of the tactical vehicle rumble against the ground as it speeds away. The tactical vehicle rolls out from beneath a dark concrete underpass, navigating through a heavily ruined cityscape. Seo peers out at her surroundings and suggests looking for their next room right in this area. She observes that things still look a little nicer around here compared to the other surrounding areas, while Ku lifts its arm in cheerful agreement. Seo starts her search on foot, standing at the base of a wide outdoor flight of concrete steps that leads out into an open area. Exploring a separate fractured room, she stops to look closely at a ruined toilet overtaken by jagged, white crystal growths. With her arms crossed, Seo sighs out loud to her pet that they are not having much luck finding anything in this location. Her pet lifts its arms in a relaxed stretch beside her head as they stand together in a narrow hallway. Outside, the silent passage leads toward a weathered metal door surrounded by boarded-up windows, old cables, and stacked wooden boxes left behind in the dark corner. Reaching out with her gloved hand, Seo firmly twists the old metal doorknob and pushes the heavy barrier open with a low creak. Standing at the threshold, she looks inside to survey a messy, abandoned living room filled with scattered papers, vintage wooden cabinets, a small couch, and a dusty table resting beneath a bright window pane. Seo looks forward with a gentle expression, suggesting to Ku that they put this place to use. She notes that the area should do just fine for them once they spend a bit of time tidying it up, while her small white companion chirps in agreement from her shoulder. Stepping into the room, Seo begins sweeping the floor with a tall straw broom to clean up the accumulated dust. Carrying a tall stack of cardboard boxes, Seo steps through the open doorway to bring their belongings inside. Close behind her, Ku carefully balances a small potted plant on its head, moving into the room with steady steps. Placing the items down, Seo rests a gloved hand on the pile and notes with satisfaction that the moving is finally taken care of, while her white companion sets the plant safely on the window ledge. Seo notices a piece of paper stuck to the wall near the door frame. Reaching out, she pulls the paper down with a quick movement, silently wondering what the note could be. Holding the page open in front of her, she begins scanning the lines of handwritten text addressed specifically to someone. She carefully holds the edge of the paper as she reads the opening lines of the message. The written words explain that the author does not know if the recipient will ever return to this room, but they decided to leave this message behind anyway, just in case. Seo continues reading the message aloud. The note reveals that the survivors are currently gathering up in a quarantine facility that was built specifically as an emergency shelter. Seo listens intently as the letter details how the equipment in the facility allows people to live there completely cut off from the outside world, ensuring their survival for several generations. Ku peeks over her shoulder as the author admits that while living in constant fear of the executioners is a frustrating prospect, keeping themselves alive must remain the highest priority. The message goes on to state that the writer would love to have the recipients help as well, which is why the exact coordinates to the facility have been written down at the bottom. Reading the numbers, Seo processes the information internally and notes to herself that the location is actually not too far from where they are right now. With Ku resting calmly on her shoulder, Seo suggests to her companion that they go take a look at the location mentioned in the note. Clad in her tactical jacket and chest rig, Seo firmly shuts the heavy driver's side. Seo looks down into the passage ahead with a calm and observant gaze. As she begins her descent, a quiet realization passes through her mind, noting internally that the coordinates from the message explicitly indicate a spot situated directly below here. High up on a cracked concrete platform, the tactical vehicle sits parked near the edge of a vast, deep shaft surrounded by decaying walls and massive industrial structures. Down below the platform, her armored hand reaches out and firmly pulls down on a metal lever. A heavy rumbling sound begins to fill the area as the massive concrete platforms slowly start to shift. Seo looks out as the rumbling continues and the platform completes its descent. Startled by a sudden realization, she glances to the side with wide eyes before quickly stepping down the flight of stairs onto the lower concrete floor. She walks down the empty, industrial corridor. Her small pet, Ku, runs closely behind her on the floor as she pauses, looking forward with a calm and silent expression. Standing at the base of a massive wall, Seo and Ku look up toward a colossal, jagged hole torn directly into the structure. Seo steps over the concrete rubble to inspect the heavy damage inside the facility. A disappointing realization crosses her mind as she internally notes that this place is no good either. The grim reality of the facility is exposed as several lifeless bodies clad in protective gear are scattered across the ruined structure, heavily impaled by jagged, blocky crystal spikes. Seo looks upon the scene, addressing Ku with a quiet tone as she begins to process the bleak aftermath of the tragedy. Seo softly reflects that perhaps any surviving people were wiped out a long time ago. She speaks the painful thought aloud, wondering if it really is just the two of them left in the world after all. Looking down at the colossal, jagged gaps torn straight through the massive structure, a grim thought crosses her mind as she notes that the inner defensive walls have been breached as well. Seo peers inside through a rectangular window panel of the concrete structure. She processes the silence, noting that she does not sense the presence of any people within the facility. Ku scurries ahead to investigate the massive concrete breaches and debris littering the path. Spotting the little creature near an unmoving figure on the floor, Seo calls out to Ku, asking if it found something. Seo steps closer to the edge of the shattered structure, looking into the room. A sweat drop trickles down her cheek as the grim discovery sinks in. causing her to whisper to herself that she simply cannot believe it. She stands quietly before a massive, monstrous entity lying slumped and lifeless among the rubble. Looking at the colossal beast and the fallen bodies of the defenders scattered around it, she notes that they actually managed to take it down. Seo reflects on the grim battlefield, realizing that although the survivors may have lost their own lives in the process, they still successfully managed to take out a special type threat without possessing any worthwhile weaponry at all. She lapses into a heavy, solemn silence, staring blankly ahead. Seo tells Ku that they should take a look around the entire facility. She begins walking down a long, straight concrete hallway with cracked walls, while Ku keeps a steady watch from her shoulder. She stops before a massive heap of scrap metal, wooden planks, and broken ladders blocking her path. Reaching out with her armored glove to grip the edge, she notes that it looks like a barricade, thinking to herself that this structure seems more hastily built than anything else she has encountered here. Seo moves deeper into the facility, carefully climbing over a messy pile of abandoned wooden panels and old desks. After navigating past the cluttered obstruction, she walks down a clean, undisturbed corridor alongside Ku. A sudden thought crosses her mind as she notes that the damage does not seem to have reached this section. Reaching the end of the clean hallway, Seo stops at an open doorway and peers inside to check the next room. On the shelves within the space, a row of plush toys and stuffed animals sits quietly beneath a string of glowing fairy lights strung across the wall. A vibrant and surprisingly warm space opens up before them, decorated with multiple rows of glowing fairy lights hanging from the ceiling, comfortable armchairs, a central table, and shelves completely packed with toys, games, and electronics next to a set of bunk beds. A curious thought crosses her mind as she internally wonders if this space was meant to be a room for children. Seo steps closer to the large, makeshift fabric tent that dominates the corner of the room. Reaching out with an armored glove, she carefully grasps the heavy cloth and pulls it aside to peer inside the dark opening. The devastating reality of the shelter is exposed within the hidden tent, where several young victims wearing gas masks lie completely motionless on cushions and blankets. Overtaken by blocky mineral growths and surrounded by empty oxygen tanks, the children rest closely together, showing the final, tragic reach of the crystallosis disease. A soft thought crosses her mind as she internally notes to herself that she finally understands the true nature of the situation. Seo realizes that all of these desperate defensive measures were taken entirely to protect the hidden children. The tactical vehicle sits loaded with cargo on the concrete platform as it slowly begins to ascend. Sitting inside the moving structure, Seo gazes quietly into the distance with a calm expression. Seo's voice echoes faintly through the shadowed facility as she calls out to Ku, gently repeating its name. She somberly reflects on the bleak reality, musing that maybe any remaining survivors really were wiped out a long time ago, leaving her to wonder if perhaps it truly is just the two of them left after all. Seo shifts her thoughts to a more hopeful realization, noting that even if the people are gone, there are still plenty of things that have been left behind. Seo suggests to Ku that they should keep exploring this world for a bit longer. Seo stands quietly at the edge of the corridor before a glowing wall monitor, which steadily emits a series of sharp electronic beeps. Standing before the weathered console, she watches the terminal interface. The monitor displays a progress bar that hits 100%, indicating that the map data for the 3rd district has been fully acquired. As a sudden notification chime resonates from the screen, Seo speaks aloud to calmly note that everything is all right. Seo shows a gentle expression as she observes their success, speaking aloud to announce that they have finally obtained a map of the area. Seo raises her heavy, armored hand to interact with the interface. Pointing her gloved finger directly at the screen, she begins scanning a digital list of facilities within the district, pausing instantly as an unexpected detail catches her attention. She points out a specific shelter facility on the digital terminal, noting that it falls within Ushimitsu's jurisdiction. Looking closely at the data, she decides that they should go ahead and start their investigation from that location today. Walking down a long, narrow industrial walkway, she admits that while a food storehouse mentioned on the terminal is certainly appealing, she firmly reminds herself that the purification mission has to come first. Arriving at a massive, open indoor platform beneath a ceiling of tangled heavy cables, Seo and Ku halt in their tracks. Seo stands quietly looking ahead at a reinforced metal door, completely surrounded by piles of motionless bodies. She internally reflects that it does not look like she can hope for much here either. Seo steps over to an attached wall ladder and rests a gloved hand on a rung as she looks back down at the floor. Surveying the grim pile of victims heavily encrusted with blocky crystal spikes, she pauses thoughtfully to note that there is something odd about this situation. She silently processes her internal confusion, wondering why there are so many people lying dead right here in front of the shelter. Suddenly, a nearby security camera activates from above, its dark lens swiveling directly toward her. An automated system announcement cuts through the quiet air, declaring that an unconfirmed life form has been detected and a scan is commencing. Hearing the voice, Seo turns her head slightly in surprise while digital scanning frames immediately target her and Ku as unrecognized targets. The security camera mounted high above the massive metal door continues to click rapidly as it projects a straight, white scanning beam. With a sudden mechanical chime, the terminal display updates to show a confirmation message on its screen. The automated scanner formally announces that the identity has been confirmed as registered to the Ushimitsu Technical Research Institute, directly extending a welcome to the shelter for Ushimitsu Saya and Ku. A stylized, glowing digital entity suddenly materializes in the hallway. Seo flinches in surprise as the hovering figure introduces itself as the artificial intelligence in charge of this shelter, politely adding that it is a pleasure to make her acquaintance. The AI explains that the information for both visitors has already been registered, showing that they work for Ushimitsu. The entity further clarifies that because Seo is an eternal child with a built-in resistance to crystallosis as well as a host of other diseases, she successfully passes the strict tenant examination. Seo questions the meaning of a tenant examination. The AI affirms her confusion, directly confirming that it goes without saying that those infected with crystallosis do not qualify for entry. The digital entity adds that anyone suffering from chronic illnesses, injuries, a low likelihood of survival, or a history of crime fails to meet the criteria as well. Seo somberly reflects on the tragic fate of the victims left out in the corridor. The AI maintains its calm profile as it details the cold logic behind the system. It explains that those people failed to meet the strict criteria to be selected for the shelter, noting that they were ultimately determined to be completely unqualified for tenancy. The massive metal door of the shelter slowly glides open to reveal a brightly lit inner corridor. The glowing AI hovers serenely right beside the entryway as the path inside clears. The AI gestures forward to guide the way, offering to give Seo a complete tour of the facility. Seo follows closely behind into the open entrance with Ku resting quietly on her shoulder. Seo stands in absolute silence, her armored hand resting tightly against her leg pouch as she waits inside the passage. She flinches in surprise as a sudden cloud of disinfectant spray shoots into the entryway with a loud hiss. The AI calmly explains that it is simply one of the mandatory rules they are forced to follow, politely asking her to bear with the procedure. The intense mist immediately causes Ku to wince and let out an uncomfortable groan. The AI proudly explains that the shelter was specially built to face a multitude of different threats, such as wars or epidemics, noting that it functions as a model case facility designed to increase the survival odds of the human race. A detailed architectural layout blueprints the massive scale of the shelter's interior. The AI details that the spacious living quarters provide a comfortable life for up to a maximum of 1,000 people, with food grown across a multitude of cultivation facilities to guarantee a steady supply at all times. It adds that an automated defense system protects the entire shelter from any external threats, and the bunker even contains its own schools and leisure facilities. Placing a hand firmly over its chest, the digital entity confidently prompts Seo to agree that this is truly a perfect shelter. Seo asks exactly how many people are actually making use of the facility right now. The AI reveals that at its peak, this shelter was home to roughly 320 people, pausing solemnly before noting that things have since changed. Seo stares straight ahead in heavy silence as the artificial AI delivers the final truth, stating that currently, Seo and Ku are the only occupants inside the shelter. The grim revelation causes Seo to pause thoughtfully as she stands with Ku inside the sterile corridor, reflecting on the absolute isolation of the empty facility. The AI hovers near the center of the hall, both looking toward a completely decomposed, skeletal body resting in a tactical uniform in the foreground. Seo carefully inspects the skeletal remains of the deceased individual, noting to herself that the body has not been preserved like a victim of the pathogen. She realizes that the true cause of death for this person must have been something entirely different from crystallosis. Turning her focus away from the skull, Seo asks the digital entity to tell her exactly what happened at this location. The AI explains that when the disaster brought forth by the executioners first began, the shelter successfully welcomed all the candidates who met the strict selection criteria. The digital entity notes that every facility operated without any issue and held out against the disaster, sustaining life inside long enough to prepare for the eventual revival of the human race. The automated record details that an unforeseen problem soon arose among the inhabitants, sparking a fierce dispute over who was suitable to act as their leader. The AI explains that the leader was responsible for deciding how the facilities should be used, holding administrative privileges that allowed them to exert complete control over the shelter's various systems. The AI says that the conflict was initially confined to arguments inside the meeting room, but the division slowly grew more intense as the people split into separate factions to fight over the administrative privileges. Seo speaks up to question why the system was unable to stop the internal fighting. The AI explains that its core duties are to manage the shelter and protect it from outside threats to ensure the tenants live in safety, noting that it was never given the authority to interfere in issues arising between the tenants themselves. Day by day, the intensity of the fighting increased inside, refusing to stop even when it began to result in a devastating loss of life. A playback shows the grim conclusion of the civil war from a high angle, with numerous fallen bodies scattered across the concrete floor among overturned lockers. The internal conflict raged relentlessly through the facility until, at last, there was only a single survivor left standing alone in the open doorway. The recording fades away, returning to the present moment as Seo and Ku stand quietly at the exact same threshold looking over the empty space. The AI continues to express its utter confusion over the tragic history, stating that the entire chain of events was completely beyond its ability to understand. It notes that life within the walls of this shelter was like a paradise, and those people were chosen for the specific purpose of carrying on the human race, yet they still resorted to such barbaric actions against one another. Seo raises her armored glove to her chin as a deep realization passes through her mind regarding the mindset of the old world. She thoughtfully muses on an obsessive focus on superiority and inferiority, internally wondering if that toxic mentality took shape in their heads during the very selection process that originally got them into this shelter. She addresses her guide directly to clarify the final fate of the casualties, asking if the last survivor was the one who ultimately disposed of the bodies of the dead. The AI confirms that this is correct, explaining that the shelter is equipped with a simple but completely functional crematorium for that exact purpose. Seo questions where the sole survivor eventually went. The AI looks forward with a calm smile, revealing to Seo that she has actually already met him. The AI details the identity of the final survivor, explaining that the man who was sitting deceased near the entrance corridor was the very survivor in question. The entity notes that even to the very end, the survivor behaved in a way that completely defied its understanding. The AI details the bizarre behavior of the final survivor, explaining that even though the man had finally found refuge at the cost of sacrificing all the others, he then asked to leave the shelter. The digital entity notes that as hard as it is to imagine, the sole survivor requested to go directly out into the outside world. It reveals that the instant the survivor realized he would not get permission to leave the shelter, he took his own life right there on the floor. Seo asks why the final survivor was not allowed to go outside. She points out that the man should have possessed the administrative privileges necessary to override the system, prompting the hovering digital entity to confirm that he did indeed have those privileges, but a different limitation stood in his way. Seo listens in stunned confusion as the AI reveals that permission to go outside would not be granted regardless of whether an occupant possessed administrative privileges. The strict system limitation catches her completely off guard, leaving her to question the reasoning behind the rule. The entity coldly admits that it cannot understand why anyone would ever arrive at a conclusion to leave the protective facility in the first place. Seo stares directly ahead with an increasingly concerned expression as the AI explains its core programming. The digital entity notes that the ideal plan of action handed down to the shelter is simply to hold out until humanity finds a way to resist crystallosis and overcome the disaster, confidently concluding that since the facility is perfect, there is absolutely no reason to ever leave it. It notes that the shelter has spent a very long time completely without any occupants, proudly adding that it is truly an honor to finally welcome both visitors as its newest tenants. The AI reasons that because the two of them are old companions, the chances of any conflict breaking out between them are extremely small. It further explains that as an eternal child, Seo represents a form of life that surpasses the regular humans it once knew, making her a perfectly worthy candidate to live in the shelter. Seo states that she unfortunately has no intention of staying inside the facility for any length of time. Before she can finish her thought, the door locks suddenly. The AI directly states that Seo does not have the authority to leave, explaining that it has forcefully cut off all contact with the outside world to protect the tenants from the extreme danger outside. Seo addresses her captor to point out that it is taking some pretty aggressive actions. She then quietly asks the entity to reveal exactly what happened to anyone who dared to defy its rules in the past. The AI that actions of that nature are entirely unacceptable, firmly adding that any attempt to force a way outside is viewed as a serious breach of the rules and is subject to immediate disciplinary action. Seo calmly processes the system's explanation as she reaches down toward her equipment with her thick, armored hand. She quietly concludes to herself that the final survivor was ultimately left with absolutely no choice but to pull the trigger on his own life. The AI confidently dismisses her thoughts, boldly stating that breaching this shelter's heavy security measures is completely impossible to begin with. Before the digital entity can even finish its sentence, a sudden and massive booming sound violently tears through the corridor. With a sudden, explosive blast, Seo fires her high-powered weapon, instantly ripping a colossal, jagged hole straight through the reinforced wall of the bunker. Bright electrical sparks and smoke crackle around the wide opening. She speaks aloud to state that she has already heard more than enough to understand that there is no reason for her to stay here any longer, directly concluding that what she has learned is sufficient. Seo notes that she is sure the system is simply performing its own designated role. In that case, she calmly announces her intention to follow her own will and go exactly where she wants to go. Hearing the unfolding danger, Ku quickly ducks down to seek safety inside Seo's tactical shoulder pouch. The digital entity delivers a stern warning, explaining that any attack on this shelter will be viewed as a direct violation of the rules, firmly adding that if Seo continues this attack, it will be forced to take the necessary countermeasures. Seo calmly declares that she is not changing her mind no matter what the system says, steadily adding that she will simply make her own exit. The entity coldly observes that the investigator's choice is truly a shame, signaling the final end of its hospitable behavior. A series of sudden mechanical thuds echoes loudly down the sterile corridor as hidden wall panels abruptly shift. The AI announces that Seo's actions constitute a serious breach of the rules, formally declaring that she is now subject to immediate disciplinary action. With a sudden mechanical snap, a hidden compartment in the floor panels pops open to reveal glowing optical lenses peering out from the darkness. Long, metallic gun barrels slowly slide outward from the tight openings, locking firmly into their combat positions. The AI hovers intensely in the center of the room beneath the heavily wired ceiling, declaring that the shelter will now use all of its capabilities to pacify the target. Seo stands holding her ground with her weapon ready as a horde of multi-legged defense drones and floating automated turrets deploy from the walls and floors to completely surround her. Looking across the messy room, she notes that she was already getting a pretty bad feeling about this situation. The mechanical security force locks onto its target. Heavily armored drones raise their weapon barrels into firing positions while the AI hovers directly behind them, ready to orchestrate the oncoming assault. Seo maintains a steady posture as she points her handgun directly toward the hostile drones. As the weapon clicks into a fully active state, she quietly laments to herself that today simply is not her lucky day. Heavy gunfire erupts from the automated defenses, sending a devastating volley of bullets ripping across the concrete floor. Seo reacts instantly, running sideways at high speed across the chamber while returning fire. Her accurate retaliatory strikes successfully pierce through the heavy shielding, completely shattering the mechanical drones. Two automated drones suddenly open fire from behind Seo as she walks through the darkness. Detecting the incoming threat instantly, Seo pivots with sharp reflexes and raises her heavily armored left arm to block the incoming energy blasts. She smoothly tracks the hostile targets and destroys them with another accurate shot, completely neutralizing the remaining threat. Lowering her weapon, she addresses the silent AI directly, asking if it wants to keep going. Realizing Seo will not yield, the AI glimmers brightly as it retreats down the narrow corridor to summon reinforcement. Hidden wall compartments suddenly burst open along both sides of the hallway, deploying even more mechanical drones and automated defenses into the passage to block her way. Observing the newly unfolding obstacle, Seo grimly reflects to herself that today really is not her lucky day. The heavy aftermath of the battle leaves a scene of total destruction within the facility corridor. With a massive booming sound, the barricade completely blows apart in a violent explosion, tearing open a wide, shattered passage into the next room. Seo calmly walks forward, tracking down the core of the facility systems. The AI glimmers in shock as Seo confronts it directly, declaring that she has finally managed to track it down and questioning if this location is its central control area. She raises her handgun and fires a devastating shot into the main terminal, causing a massive explosion to tear directly through the structural wall with a violent blast. Seo stands amid the rising smoke, showing noticeable battle scars across her face from the intense confrontation. Turning back toward her side pouch, she smiles gently to reassure her companion that they do not need to worry because her injuries will heal in no time. Seo then raises her hand and walks away down the long corridor, suggesting that they head back up for a bit. Seo stands in the dimly lit corridor, looking down thoughtfully at the motionless body of the final survivor. Observing his resting hand and gear, she reflects deeply on the tragic history of the bunker. Seo considers that if a cruel selection system had never existed, this man might have still been alive for her to meet today. Seo steps up to the elevator console and presses the call button, prompting the heavy doors to slide open. Dismissing her lingering regrets, Seo notes to herself that there is simply no point in dwelling on the past now. Beside her head, Ku lets out a brief chirp, prompting Seo to softly agree that her companion is entirely right. Looking toward the exit, Seo states her final decision to Ku, explaining that they should carry the deceased survivor back up to the upper level. She resolves to properly bury him and lay him to rest alongside all the other people who perished at the shelter entrance. A lone figure wearing tactical gear crouches within a dark, jagged tunnel formed by massive crystal growths. With a steady hand, the figure uses a specialized tool to strike the mineral surface, creating sharp echoing sounds as they work. Focused on the task, the individual in the gas mask continues the laborious process of breaking through the dense material. From a distance, this masked man remains crouched deep inside the tunnel carved directly into the dead monster's crystal-encrusted body. Stepping inside the quiet structure, Seo looks around the vast room where large blocky stones and mineral fragments sit. With Ku resting calmly on her shoulder, Seo softly remarks to her companion that the place is truly amazing. Looking over the collection, she explains to Ku that all the items currently on display in this building were apparently discovered right here on this planet. Seo gently smiles as she remarks that the place is full of things she has never seen before, making the exploration quite fascinating. Ku tilts its head and makes a soft sound to grab her attention. Seo tells her small companion that she knows and has certainly not forgotten her true duty. Turning her attention back to the massive scale of their surroundings, Seo walks up a wide concrete staircase overgrown with thick vines. She silently muses on just how massive the entire facility really is. Seo pauses inside the facility, internally questioning which path she needs to take in order to reach her destination. She enters a massive, dilapidated exhibition hall where the skeletal remains of large prehistoric creatures dominate the space. Seo and Ku gaze up at the large jaw in complete silence. Seo quickly moves back to a stable section of the ruined floor, watching small fragments of debris fall silently down into the pitch-black opening. Sweat dripping down her face, she catches her breath as she nervously notes that the sudden collapse totally freaked her out. Seo observes the massive abyss below, silently reflecting that the gigantic pit seems to be incredibly deep. She turns her attention back to her path when Ku lets out a brief chirp to keep her alert. Seo spots a metal ladder hooked securely onto the fractured edge of the deep pit. Crouching down to examine it more closely, she notes with surprise that this ladder is positioned right over the dark drop. She begins her descent down into the pitch-black abyss with Ku clinging closely to her side. Observing the secure mounts, she notes that the equipment is in great condition compared to everything else around it, leading her to realize that someone may have passed through this area after the great disaster. Reaching a lower floor, Seo steps off the ladder and turns to inspect her new surroundings in the dim light. She raises a gloved hand to pause as she speaks up to point out a new discovery. The girl discovers a series of crude white arrows drawn on the cracked walls. Reaching out to touch the markings, she notes to Ku that these signals might lead them to something important, suggesting to her small companion that they follow them. Seo tracks the guiding marks as they point past several closed doors. Passing a cluster of jagged blocky debris, she silently wonders exactly where these markings are leading them. She admits that she is quite surprised to find that the crystal growths managed to spread down into these lower floors. Following the markings down the corridor, Seo suddenly comes across a massive fabric partition. She notes from behind that it appears to be a tent. Observing the makeshift setup in the dark room, she internally questions if this place might be the remains of someone's base. Deciding that it is definitely worth taking a look inside, Seo steps closer to the vertical opening of the large tent. Before she can reach out, a sudden, heavy thunk echoes loudly from within the dark space, causing her eyes to widen in complete shock as she instantly alerts to the unexpected noise. A stranger clad in full tactical gear and wearing a dark gas mask emerges from the shadows near a wall panel. Seo stares in complete shock, completely stunned by the sudden presence of another human being. The masked figure stands steady on the stone floor, whispering to himself that it simply cannot be true as the reality of finding another survivor sinks in. The girl stands in absolute silence, her eyes wide as she absorbs the presence of the stranger. The masked individual continues walking forward across the debris-strewn floor. Seo watches closely as the trembling survivor looks up through the dark gas mask, softly gasping out that he simply cannot believe it. Kneeling on the ground, the trembling stranger speaks through the gas mask, admitting in disbelief that he never expected there to be any other survivors left out there in the world. Seo reacts quickly to the survivor's weakened state, frantically questioning if the stranger is doing all right. The masked figure responds with a shaky reassurance that he is fine, before leaning forward in sudden surprise as he closely examines the investigator. The stranger speaks up with deep confusion, urgently questioning how Seo even managed to stay alive without wearing a protective mask. Seo pauses as she starts to explain her situation. She calmly states that her lack of a mask is a long story. She suggests that they first find somewhere safe to talk, prompting an immediate nod of agreement from the masked stranger. He suggests heading straight inside the large tent. The stranger confirms that the zone inside is actually the safest area around and notes that they can chat comfortably in there. A wall terminal glows brightly to show that the disinfection is complete and contamination is at 0%. The stranger quickly offers a sincere apology for being so shaken up back there, though Seo gently assures them that it is not his fault and notes that she should apologize as well. Removing his gas mask to reveal his face, the older man introduces himself as Tomini, explaining that he used to work at the facility before the great disaster occurred. Holding his mask in his hands, he gently asks the young investigator for her name. She silently reflects on the incredible reality that she is looking at a real living human being. Seo quickly raises her gloved hands in surprise as she stammers out a response. The girl introduces herself as Ushimitsu Saya, a provisional special investigator from the Ushimitsu Technical Research Institute. She explains that she is conducting her searches with clear goals in mind, seeking out survivors to take under her protection while working to purify the pathogen responsible for crystallosis. As Seo further clarifies that she has come to this facility to investigate and purify the remains of a diffusion-type executioner, Tomini gasps in sudden, profound shock. Tomini softly admits that he understands. He quietly confesses that he feels as if he is completely dreaming right now. Seo directly addresses the newly discovered survivor, questioning what he is doing down here in this facility. Tomini explains that he is actually here for pretty much the same reasons she is. He adds that he has some unfinished business left to settle inside that monster. Tomini extends an open hand toward the investigator to formally ask for her assistance. He asks if she would mind coming with him, explaining that it would be truly great if she could lend him a hand. Seo asks him if he has truly been completely alone this entire time. Having put his dark gas mask back on, Tomini quietly confirms her thought, admitting that she is actually the very first person he has seen ever since the great disaster occurred. Seo listens closely as Tomini shares grim details about the nature of their targets. Tomini remarks that he is sure she already knows this, but those giant monsters eat people. He further explains that they store corpses inside themselves and use the crystallized bodies to keep generating more toxic miasma. Tomini emphasizes that even after it dies, the miasma does not stop, continuing on almost indefinitely. He recalls the terrifying moments of the past. He details how a diffusion-type monster launched a devastating attack on the facility right during the Great Disaster. A horrific memory reveals the colossal, skeletal beast looming over a ruined cityscape filled with crumbling high-rises. Tomini recalls with deep sadness that aside from himself, every other employee at the facility was eaten by the creature. Tomini somberly reflects that he was unlucky enough to survive the initial slaughter, which forced him to flee to a nearby shelter where he lived inside completely cut off for a very long time. He reflects deeply on his isolation, quietly emphasizing that he was left completely cut off from the world for one hell of a long time. As they walk down a spacious, dilapidated corridor covered in scattered leaves, Tomini continues to share his painful past with Seo. He admits that he tried countless times to force himself to go outside and search for survivors, but he was completely overwhelmed by terror each time and could not manage to take a single step outside until he was finally able to make it out the door roughly 3 years ago, solely because he could feel himself closing in on death from old age. He explains how his true purpose finally became clear. He states that when he eventually discovered the executioner's corpse, it finally dawned on him what he needed to do, realizing that he had to set free all the people trapped inside that monster. Tomini explains from behind his mask that he has come to believe this grand task is exactly what he should use his remaining time in this world to accomplish. Arriving at a massive, jagged cavern overtaken by dense mineral formations, Tomini stops on a wooden pathway to announce that they have finally reached their destination. Tomini notes that he has already managed to dig quite a long way inside by himself, calmly adding his belief that they are now quite close to setting those trapped people free. Staring into the deep cavern, she silently marvels to herself, wondering if the old man truly managed to clear out this entire massive space completely by himself. Tomini requests her help to free the trapped people, asking if she would be willing to lend him a hand. Seo meets his gaze with an earnest and supportive expression, immediately offering her complete agreement. Stepping forward, Seo unleashes a powerful beam from her equipment that strikes the dense crystal structure. The intense energy cleanly slices a large section away, allowing her to hold up a massive shattered piece of the mineral wall. She informs Tomini that her work should do it, reassuring him that he can safely head inside the newly cleared passage now. Tomini looks back at Seo in absolute amazement. He speaks through his gas mask, marveling at how incredible she is and noting how remarkably simple clearing the path seemed to be for her. Seo dismisses the praise by explaining that she barely did anything at all. She warmly shifts the credit back to Tomini, reminding him that he is the one who did all the hard digging to get them this far. Tomini looks up at Seo to admit the truth about his situation. He hesitantly explains that after digging all this way, almost all of the makeshift tools he managed to scrape together have basically become completely unusable. He admits that he honestly believed there was no way left for him to proceed on his own. Deeply moved by her help, Tomini offers his sincere thanks, mentioning that it feels almost as if she were sent directly by God. Suddenly, he pauses and denies something. He somberly notes that if a god really existed, then a tragedy like this would never have happened in the first world. Kneeling down among the debris, Tomini looks down at one of the fallen victims with a heavy heart. He touches the cheek of a body deeply encrusted by blocky mineral clusters, softly calling out the name Kane as the tragic recognition sinks in. Tomini pulls the crystal-covered body close, cradling it tightly in a quiet embrace within the dim cavern. Seo watches the somber reunion in absolute silence. From a high angle, a long row of dark body bags lies quietly arranged across the concrete floor. Seo stands silently near the end of the line, keeping a somber watch while Tomini slowly walks across the open space, carrying another recovered victim toward the designated resting area. He stands carrying Kane's fragile, motionless dead body in his arms, as he sadly tells Seo that this is the last one. With a steady, heavy motion, the old man carefully seals the heavy fabric around the final victim. Seo notes that without any crystallized human bodies left inside, the toxic miasma should eventually dissipate over time. Looking down with a gentle expression, Seo softly reasons to her companion that all that is left for them to do now is to cremate these people. He offers a low, somber murmur of complete agreement as he processes her words in the quiet space. Seo explains the standard operational procedures to her companion, noting that typically with a diffusion-type monster, she would simply tear open a hole in the chest area and extract the bodies that way. Tomini listens closely while trying to stand. She evaluates the structural integrity of the area, noting that in this specific case, attempting to breach the chest would run a real risk of causing the entire building to collapse, meaning that even though digging a hole from the side is a great deal more time-consuming, the method Tomini chose was ultimately the optimal choice. Tomini seeks clarity regarding her background, recalling her statement about working as an investigator from the Ushimitsu Technical Research Institute and tentatively asking if she has been out exploring this world all this time. Seo steps across the narrow corridor to take a seat on a nearby concrete block, calmly confirming that she has indeed been traveling throughout the desolate ruins. Seo describes the true purpose behind her long journey, explaining that she has been going around looking for clues about crystallosis and the executioners, searching for survivors, and cremating the bodies of the dead. Tomini reacts with concern to her heavy duty, questioning if she has truly been managing everything entirely by herself without anyone else around to help her. Seo looks downward, closing her eyes in a brief moment of quiet reflection as she softly confirms that she doesn't have anyone else. A warm and gentle expression fills Seo's face as she looks back up with a calm smile. Gesturing lightly toward her small white companion, Ku, who peeks out from over her shoulder, she proudly notes that she has this little guy right here with her, and that is more than enough. Looking toward his guest from behind his dark gas mask, he admits that he has actually been meaning to ask her a question. Tomini points a finger straight toward Seo's shoulder, directly questioning what exactly that little creature is. The inquiry catches Seo completely off guard as she stands with wide, startled eyes while Ku shakes nervously behind her head. A warm and gentle expression fills Seo's face as she looks forward with a soft smile. She explains that Ku has been with her ever since she was born and they were raised together, directly noting that they are basically like family. Hearing the explanation, Tomini murmurs softly to himself as the truth finally registers. Tomini presses for more information, as he asks Seo where she was born. He shifts the conversation toward a glimmer of hope, questioning if there are still other people living out there where she came from. Tomini reasons that since someone as young as her can walk around completely unprotected without a mask, he assumes there must be an active community of survivors who escaped the disaster. He presumes that the Ushimitsu Technical Institute she works for has successfully discovered a definitive method to deal with crystallosis. Seo looks forward with a calm but somber expression, delivering the devastating truth that Tomini is unfortunately the very first living human being she has ever met. She explains that deep below the city, hidden beneath even the underground areas, lies a secure facility where researchers worked on a special kind of science meant to fight back against the great disaster. She details the logic of the old researchers, explaining that if crystallosis is a disease that infects and kills regular humans, they believed they simply needed to give birth to a new kind of human constructed in a fundamentally different way so they could safely entrust the future to them. Seo reveals her true nature, stating that she is an eternal child and the one and only successful result of that underground research. With Ku keeping watch right next to her head, she directly clarifies that, put simply, she is an immortal, artificial person. Sweat trickles down his face as the shocking revelation leaves him completely stunned. Tomini turns away slightly in disbelief, and argues that she cannot possibly expect him to believe an unbelievable story like that. Still clad in his protective gear, the old worker points out that she looks exactly like a normal human being from the outside. Seo maintains a calm, quiet smile. Moving intentionally, she begins to loosen her heavy, armored combat glove. Without a moment of hesitation, she drives the blade straight through her own bare hand, prompting Tomini to gasp in absolute horror from across the room as he watches the shocking proof of her words. The open wound begins bubbling intensely and knitting itself back together until the sliced skin is completely smooth and unblemished once more. Seo asks if this counts as definitive proof, calmly noting that she has heard that injuries do not mend this way with normal humans. Tomini stares in complete, stunned silence, whispering that he simply cannot believe it. He processes the unbelievable reality of her story, noting that she mentioned being the only successful result of the project and tentatively asking what exactly that implies about the research itself. Seo calmly confirms his suspicion, stating that his understanding is entirely correct. Seo reveals the scope of the project, explaining that the original plan was to raise many thousands of eternal children who would eventually start work on various reconstruction tasks as the project progressed, though she believes the entire plan was simply something the researchers had hastily thrown together in the first place. She explains the tragic conclusion of the experiment, noting that aside from herself, none of the other eternal children even managed to make it to the birthing stage. Tomini sits heavily on his bench with his head lowered, processing the grim historical details in silence before offering a quiet murmur that he understands the situation. Seo shifts the conversation forward, recalling his earlier statement and directly asking Tomini if he used to work here at this facility. The old worker looks up toward her from his bench to confirm that her understanding is indeed correct. She addresses her companion with a curious expression, pressing for details regarding the artifacts found on the upper floors. She questions him if it is really true that all the things on display here in the exhibition hall once actually existed on this planet. She looks on with a touch of confusion and mild surprise as Tomini suddenly breaks into a soft, unexpected chuckle behind his gas mask. Tomini asks for her forgiveness as he catches his breath. He emotionally explains that he simply could not help himself after realizing that the facility finally has a visitor to the museum after such a very long time. He reflects that their sudden meeting must be a kind of fate, warmly offering to show her around the facility. Seo instantly brightens up with joy at the invitation. Seo looks down with wide, fascinated eyes at a collection of small mineral specimens arranged carefully behind a glass display pane. Beside her, Tomini gestures toward the collected items while sharing their history. The massive skeletal remains of an ancient mammoth dominate the dilapidated exhibition hall, its giant tusks and ribbed frame covered in overgrown vines and dust. Seo looks upward in profile with a look of quiet wonder as she observes the massive, jagged jaws of a large fossilized creature mounted against the decaying wall. Seo and Tomini walk down a narrow corridor flanked on both sides by massive floor-to-ceiling shelves, completely filled with rows of neatly catalogued natural specimens. Looking around the room, Tomini explains that this museum once held an enormous amount of research materials and important specimens of the various living things who went extinct during the Great War long ago. Tomini reflects somberly on the grand efforts of the past, recalling how his colleagues and he traveled all over the world, gathering them all to add to the extensive collection. Tomini gazes down bitterly at an old, faded photograph in his gloved hand showing 3 researchers standing together in their lab coats. His voice trembles with heavy grief as he notes that all of their hard work, dedication, and memories were completely taken from them by that devastating creature. He talks about the long history that was painstakingly built upon the great deeds of those who came before them, finding it incredibly sad to think that all of it would end so abruptly in this quiet decay. Breaking the heavy silence, Tomini turns around to carry his gear down the corridor, suggesting that they should get back to their task. He states that he will be waiting for her back at the previous location, prompting a calm murmur of agreement from Seo as she watches him walk away. Seo stands quietly at the open doorway of the facility room as she prepares to step out. On the concrete floor below, Tomini stands waiting with a metal transport cart to receive the final cargo. She looks ahead from behind as she calmly announces that they have finally gathered everyone. In the foreground, the lined-up body bags rest silently, marking the completion of their somber task. Tomini offers his sincere gratitude to Seo, warmly telling her that she was a huge help in completing the mission. Seo responds with a gentle smile, insisting that she should be the one thanking him. She warmly notes that she is simply glad that she could lend a hand to support his mission. Tomini questions if she intends to keep on exploring the desolate world outside. Seo gives a firm confirmation that she is indeed going to continue her journey. Seo looks back with a supportive expression, clarifying that before she continues her journey, she is first going to take him to a safe area that has already been purified. Tomini stumbles over his words in complete surprise as he struggles to respond. She raises an armored glove to her chin as a thoughtful realization crosses her mind, prompting her to remind Tomini that there may still be some surviving people out there. Turning directly toward the old worker, she extends a warm invitation, asking him why he doesn't just come along with her. Tomini raises his gloved hand to his head, admitting from behind his dark gas mask that her invitation is a truly wonderful offer, but he hesitates as a sudden shift occurs. Seo flinches with wide, startled eyes as Tomini takes hold of his protective face covering and abruptly pulls it completely away from his head. Seo lunges forward with a panicked expression, frantically extending her heavy armored hand to stop him as she realizes the severe danger of exposing himself to the atmosphere. She looks on with wide, terrified eyes as sweat drips down her face, frantically demanding to know why he would ever do something so reckless. Seo warns him that the deadly crystallosis miasma has absolutely not been cleared from this area of the facility yet. Ku stands completely frozen on the floor. Tomini calmly speaks up to acknowledge the truth of her words, quietly confirming that the toxic air has indeed not been purified. Facing Tomini in profile, she urgently demands to know why he would intentionally expose himself to the toxic air like that. A thin, gentle smile appears across Tomini's bearded face. He quietly addresses her distress, firmly noting that this fatal path was ultimately the right choice for him. Seo processes his words and questions what he means by the right choice. Tomini reaches up, placing his armored glove steady as he calmly explains that he cannot leave this facility or travel along with her. Tomini calmly states that he has already decided exactly how he wants things to end for himself. She looks down slightly, a somber and quiet sadness filling her gaze as the painful reality fully settles over her. Tomini speaks with a steady voice to acknowledge that this is truly the end of the road for him. Seo listens somberly as Tomini continues to share his parting thoughts. The old man reasons that if what she said earlier about being immortal is true, then her end won't come for a long time. He contemplates the vast world outside, noting that while there might still be people left alive, or maybe there aren't, he truly doesn't know for sure, but either way, she remains the only person who can walk freely on the face of this planet. Tomini places his armored glove reassuringly on Seo's shoulder as they stand face to face. He gently reminds the young investigator that whatever she chooses to do, and wherever she chooses to go, whether she decides to continue her purification mission or abandon it completely. He delivers his final, liberating truth, reminding her with absolute certainty that she is completely free. Tomini points out that she has a unique opportunity to have everything to herself, suggesting that she should enjoy it a bit since there is nobody else left around to complain anyway. She quietly objects, murmuring that she simply cannot bring herself to do something so incredibly selfish. Tomini counters her argument by noting that he is a man who just selfishly decided how he is going to die, reasoning that his perspective makes what he says about freedom pretty convincing. Seo looks down with a gentle, accepting smile as she listens to her companion, while Ku stands quietly on her back. Tomini notes that it looks like it is finally about time for them to say their goodbyes. Seo pauses in place with a slightly curious expression, calling out to address Tomini directly. Hearing her voice, Tomini stops walking down the narrow concrete corridor and turns back toward her, prompting Seo to tentatively ask if she can request one last favor from him before they part ways. Seen from a high angle, Tomini begins to experience fits of heavy coughing as he stands near the open doorway of the facility control area. Moving inside, the old worker carefully sets down the old photograph of his past colleagues, gazing across a row of resting body bags while somberly wondering exactly how many years it has been since all of them were tragically eaten by the creature. Tomini reaches out with his armored glove, his fingers clacking softly against the weathered keys of the control console. He somberly reflects that even after that monster took absolutely everything from him, his pathetic life just continued onward, noting that despite it all, he lived on, but that is finally going to come to an end now. A peaceful and satisfied smile appears across Tomini's bearded face. With a sudden movement, his heavy armored hand firmly pulls down a main terminal switch. A loud electronic alarm begins to blare relentlessly through the chamber, while the automated facility system formally announces that incineration will commence in 10 seconds. Tomini stands waiting quietly in profile as a digital countdown timer drops to 9, letting out a heavy cough as a final, quiet thought crosses his mind. He looks toward the facility wall as the digital countdown continues to drop down to 7 and 8. He internally wonders if there is some kind of destination awaiting Seo and Ku beyond the endlessly sprawling ruins that make up this decayed city. Tomini slumps back to sit calmly against the structure wall as the counter drops to 5 and 4. He peacefully reflects to himself that it is a bit of a shame that he won't be able to see what final answer lies in store for the two companions on their upcoming journey. As a deep rumble vibrates throughout the chamber, the countdown reaches 3, 2, and 1. Tomini draws a handgun with a sharp click and firmly raises the weapon to his own head, deciding to end his life on his own terms before the automated incinerator triggers. A sharp, echoing gunshot rings out from behind the heavy metal doors of the facility's control area. Immediately afterward, a bright orange flash illuminates the window partition as the automated incineration process violently triggers with a loud rush of heat and flames. A freshly developed photograph captures Seo and Tomini standing side by face inside the bunker, with Ku peeking calmly from over her shoulder. The picture stands out as a permanent reminder of their short journey together. Seo stares down at the newly printed photograph with a soft, meaningful expression. She suddenly notices something. Seo gazes from behind at a decaying sign that boldly reads City of Freedom. A quiet thought crosses her mind as she silently muses on the concept of freedom in this abandoned world. She looks up toward the open sky above the concrete structural frames, quietly noting to herself that she will have to look for a frame that will perfectly fit this memory. Rain pours heavily over the brick exterior of an old building as a storm rages outside. Indoors, a young woman sits huddled on the floor with her hands pressed tightly over her ears, trembling uncontrollably in the dim room. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoes from the door, causing her to widen her eyes in absolute panic. Repeated knocks echo through the silent room, drawing attention toward the main wooden door flanked by a chair and a cabinet. The young woman looks ahead with wide eyes. Compelled by the noise, she slowly approaches the entrance, reaching out with a trembling hand to firmly grip and turn the metal doorknob. The young woman stands cautiously at the threshold, holding one hand defensively against her chest as she peers silently into the darkness outside. Completely unaware of the danger behind her, a shadowy figure with a single wide, piercing eye looms silently in the darkness of the room. Ku lets out a sharp, echoing cry, its long ears pointing up as it reacts in sheer panic to the unfolding danger. A massive, dark shadow violently rears back as dark fluid splatters across the bright background, accompanied by a loud, sudden sound. Seo sits casually on a couch, reaching into a bag of snacks as she watches a screen. Looking entirely unamused, she observes to herself that this movie's plot is shaping up the exact same way as the last one they watched, while Ku rests quietly beside her. Heavy rain pours relentlessly over a desolate landscape of crumbling city buildings and dense ruins. The gloomy weather has continued like this for several days now. Seo stares ahead with a blank, internally reflecting that there shouldn't be anything physically wrong with her body, but she simply does not feel like doing anything at all. Seen from behind, Tomini's face came to her mind. A heavy thought lingers over the scene, reflecting on how everything has changed ever since that last day with Tomini. She stares blankly into the quiet room, internally wondering what could possibly be wrong with her while Ku remains resting against the cushions beside her. Seo silently reflects to herself that this is truly the very first time she has ever felt this way in her entire life. She lies completely flat on the couch, burying her face into her arms in total exhaustion. She wonders if it would really matter if she simply ended up lying here forever. Seo reflects deeply on Tomini's parting words about her path forward. She considers that whether she decides to continue her purification mission or ultimately chooses to abandon it completely, it does not really change anything in the end. Beside her, Ku suddenly pops up with its ears raised high in sudden alertness. A sudden, faint knock sounds through the quiet room, catching Seo completely by surprise as she rests on the pillow. Seo stares toward the door in confusion alongside Ku, silently wondering what that noise could possibly be. The small companion freezes in place, silently signaling to wait as it processes the previous girl's fate in the movie. Seo looks onward with wide, anxious eyes, internally realizing what this specific sound actually is. The repetitive sound from the plane door, demanding her attention. Seo reaches out to firmly grip the metal handle, turning it slowly until the latch releases with a distinct click. Suddenly, she looks behind the silent room in total disbelief, thinking the ghost from the movie might appear. A voice from the hall announces that the visitor is from the District 1-2 Central Library, catching Seo completely off guard and making her flinch in surprise. A small mechanical robot equipped with tread stands directly on the floor, politely stating that it has come to request the return of borrowed materials. With rustling sounds echoing through the space, she reaches directly into a shelf to look through the tightly arranged books and documents. Seo pulls a thick volume from the packed shelves, silently questioning if this is the correct book she has been searching for. The heavy book features a large rectangular label on its front cover, written 1-2 Central Library in old characters. Seo kneels on the floor inside the storage room and holds the item out, calmly telling the robot that here it is as she places it directly into the machine's arm. A whirring mechanical sound echoes as the library drone deposits the volume inside its storage compartment, officially confirming that the book return has been verified. The machine turns back towards Seo to explain that because the book is extremely overdue, she is officially given a 1,000-day moratorium on borrowing any further materials from this day forward, telling her to please be more careful in the future. Seo asks if there is currently anyone else using the library or if there are any other librarians left. The library drone steadily responds that the number of patrons is currently 0 and clarifies that it is the only librarian currently employed by the library. The library drone explains that due to the great disaster, it is operating under emergency procedures, focusing all efforts on its highest priority task to retrieve and preserve the remaining books that make up the collection. Seo looks ahead thoughtfully as she processes the concept of the machine's ongoing mission. She addresses the library drone directly, questioning exactly how many books it still has left to retrieve from the outside world. A blinking sound echoes from the library drone as its display screen processes the database request. The machine systematically calculates the details and states that there are currently 4,891 applicable books remaining to be collected. She softly remarks to the drone that the number of remaining items is incredibly large. Seo reflects to herself that having a definite end in sight actually makes the library drone's mission seem much more realistic than her own endless journey across the desolate world. The library drone formally announces that it will now return directly to the library in order to preserve the recovered book. Seo sits calmly on her knees before the packed shelves, softly murmuring her understanding in response. With a polite parting message, the library drone states that it looks forward to her continued patronage. Seo stands in the center of the quiet room, staring silently toward the closed door. Hearing a sudden gesture from her companion, she turns slightly to look back at Ku, who pops up from behind her shoulder. Seo smiles gently and agrees with her companion, firmly resolving that they should give their own journey a shot. Standing outside in the storm with a hooded jacket, Seo confronts the library drone directly, hesitantly questioning if it is all right for her to accompany the machine on its journey. The machine responds directly to her request, systemically noting that she is currently under a moratorium due to an overdue book and cannot borrow any new materials. Seo clarifies that she already knows about the borrowing restriction but simply wants to see the library itself. Hearing her explanation, the library drone accepts her presence and instructs Seo to follow behind it through the rain. She continues walking steadily through a massive landscape of destroyed concrete frames. Seo silently reflects that she ought to have known from the very beginning just how poorly thought out her assigned mission truly was, realizing that even if she managed to completely purify the crystallosis pathogen, all of that work would be totally meaningless if there was nobody left alive in the world to see it. She continues her quiet reflection, noting to herself that despite the futility, carrying out this purification mission was the entire reason why she was born into this world in the first place. Looking closely at the machine, Seo internally ponders how this robot truly feels about its designated duty. Seo reconsiders her previous thought, realizing it might instead be that the machine does not even think about its duty at all. The library drone suddenly comes to a halt on the wet pavement, formally announcing that they have finally arrived at their destination. Standing at the base of a wide flight of concrete stairs, Seo gazes up at a massive, cathedral-like structure in the pouring rain. The building is heavily ruined, with broken arched windows, collapsed roofs, and thick vines wrapping around its stone walls. The library drone slowly leads the way forward toward the dark, wide entrance. She observes to herself that the building has been completely burned up, internally noting that collecting books in this ruined state seems entirely hopeless. She listens as the library drone points toward a wall rack and politely requests that she hang her raincoat up over there. Stepping inside the quiet building, Seo takes off her heavy, wet outer coat to settle in. Seo stands inside a massive, towering library hall flanked by rows of empty, multi-tiered bookshelves stretching into the dark. Looking around the dim and hollow space in profile, Seo notes with a touch of hesitation that she does not see any books here at all. The massive wooden shelves surrounding them remain completely stripped and barren. The machine rolls forward on its treads next to Seo's armored boots, systemically instructing her to follow this way. A heavy rumble echoes through the space as the elevator doors slide open. The library drone explains to Seo that the upper facility sustained severe damage from past events. Because of the destruction, the machine confirms that everything has been moved down to the underground storage area for safekeeping. The library drone slowly leads the way down a narrow corridor between the blocks, with Seo and Ku following closely behind. Seo stands before an open aisle packed tightly with rows of perfectly preserved books, marveling softly that there are so many volumes stored inside. Looking down at the library drone, she silently contemplates the point of its mission, wondering if there is really any meaning left in preserving them with nobody around to read them. Seo turns her head to listen closely as the library drone begins to explain its purpose. The machine speaks of protecting the collection for those who may one day follow in human footsteps. The machine clarifies its programming, explaining that if there is even a single soul left who hungers for knowledge, then there is definitive value in protecting these books. The library drone clarifies its background, stating that those guiding principles were originally the exact words spoken by the head librarian. Seo looks down thoughtfully in profile, pressing for more information regarding the machine's programming. She questions the drone if it is simply continuing its mission because it was ordered to do so by the head librarian, even though there is no way to know if that hypothetical person searching for knowledge will ever actually show up, and even though the task might ultimately be totally meaningless. The drone responds directly through its interface, calmly stating that it fully agrees with the head librarian's view. It continues its explanation by preparing to present the definitive proof that those instructions were correct. It points out that the real proof is simply the fact that Seo is standing right here in the room now. The library drone continues its explanation before the large rows of books, clarifying that the most important thing is to simply continue protecting the facility. It systemically notes that whether doing so is ultimately meaningless or not is not the real issue at hand. She softly acknowledges the machine's perspective, reflecting to herself that the drone's outlook is completely right. Seo internalizes that the same logic applies to her own journey, understanding that whether her mission is meaningless or not is not something she can possibly know the answer to right here and now, and that isn't what truly matters to her anyway. The drone announces that it will go make preparations to host a guest. It systemically informs Seo that as long as it is within the confines of the facility, she is completely free to peruse any book she likes. Seo stands quietly in profile, listening intently to the machine's instructions. As it moves ahead, the machine instructs Seo that if she feels in need of a rest, she should please make her way directly to the break room. Seo slides a book from the crowded shelves with her armored hand. As she gently flips through the pages, she thoughtfully muses that within every single one of these books is someone's thoughts and feelings, finding the mere thought of it completely mind-boggling. She reflects on human nature, thinking that whether it is movies or books, humans felt the need to create all new worlds even though the real world itself is almost too vast, concluding that humans truly are mysterious creatures. Heavy rain continues to pour over the grand, ruined concrete library structure. A somber realization settles over the desolation, noting that if there really is not anybody left alive in the world, then no more new worlds will ever be born either. A quiet, lingering thought crosses her mind as she prepares to move on to her next action. A sharp sliding sound echoes as Seo enters the break room, standing near the door with Ku peering from over her shoulder. The library drone greets her arrival by noting that her timing is excellent, extending its segmented mechanical arm toward a table to state that it has just finished pouring some hot tea for its guest. Seo stands before the library drone inside the room, hesitantly asking if she can inquire about something. The machine stands ready on the floor, directly asking what exactly she would like to know. She looks ahead with an earnest expression, offering to help the library drone gather up the remaining library books from across the desolate outside world. She directly questions the machine if taking on this task alongside it would be all right with its programming. After a brief pause, the machine responds directly, questioning why she would ever want to do something like that. Seo explains that she has her own mission as well, noting that she will be traveling through this district for a while and going around to various different areas. She reasons that there might be unreturned books hidden away in some of the places she visits, preparing to reveal her ultimate motivation. She continues explaining her desire to help, noting that this library is still alive and there is still meaning in protecting this place. Because of that, she affirms that she simply wants to help the machine accomplish its goal. The library drone stays completely still, falling into a silent pause as it processes her words. Suddenly, a sharp electronic beep echoes as the device's display screen lights up requesting the user to wait. With a continuous mechanical sound, the library drone begins printing a document from its front slot. The machine formally announces that it has printed a temporary employee ID along with a complete list of the books belonging to this library. The library drone formally states that it is assigning her the official role of assistant in the retrieval of the missing books. Seo reaches out her gloved hand toward the library drone, warmly offering her thanks as the machine raises its thin claw to accept the gesture. Confident in their new partnership, Seo encourages them to go out and find those books together. The library drone clarifies the strict terms of their arrangement, firmly reminding her that even in the role of an assistant, her current restriction due to the overdue book will absolutely not be rescinded. The lone tactical vehicle drives across a heavily damaged concrete overpass stretching through the dark city ruins. Seo sits calmly at the steering wheel with Ku resting on her shoulder, reflecting silently to herself as a new realization crosses her mind. Seo internally notes that her assigned mission was simply what set her on this path to begin with. She resolves to herself that even if there are no more survivors left out there in the world, it still absolutely does not change what she has to do. She internally reflects on her deep desire to learn more about this world. Seo reaches out her gloved hand toward the shelf to pick up a document. Holding a white booklet labeled with old characters, she continues her silent thought, musing on her goal to understand the history of the world as well as the researchers who brought her into it. Seo contemplates her immortal nature, noting to herself that absolutely nothing in her life is guaranteed, not even death. She reflects on her endless path and decides that she will live her life a bit more freely from now on. The library drone stands nearby next to a loaded book cart, as Seo considers the freedom of her journey, knowing there is nobody left around to complain about the choices she makes. Inside a quiet living room, Seo lets out a relaxed breath and stretches her arms over her head. Nearby, Ku lies completely flat and resting on a cushion atop a long bench, enjoying a peaceful moment of comfort in their room. Seo looks toward a shelf with a gentle smile on her face. Resting there is a framed photograph showing Seo standing side by side with Tomini, both wearing heavy gear. The library drone diligently cleans up an old room. First, the treaded machine extends its mechanical arm to sweep the floor with a straw broom. Next, it moves on its treads to carefully wipe down a wooden floor with a cloth. Finally, the library drone extends its thin arm upward to pat down the dusty edges of a shelf with a fluffy duster. Inside a large, quiet office room with a damaged ceiling, the library drone works alone behind a big wooden desk. The surrounding walls are lined with tall bookshelves, many of which are completely empty or holding only a few surviving books. The machine moves back and forth in the wide space between two couches, cleaning the neglected office. Seo calls out tentatively into the room, looking around to see if the librarian is nearby. Spotting the treaded machine busy at work, she smiles gently and notes that she has finally found where it is. She states that she has come to make a complete report on the specific materials she managed to gather throughout the day. Seo pauses as she takes in her surroundings. Intrigued by the large desk and shelves, she openly wonders what kind of room they are currently standing in. The library drone systematically explains that this specific room is the head librarian's office. Seo looks closely at the head librarian's desk, noting internally that things have been kept incredibly neat and tidy in the room. Curious about the cleanliness, she asks the library drone if it handles the cleaning duties in the office every single day. Holding its broom steady, the library drone confirms that it cleans to the absolute best of its ability. The drone prompts Seo about her update, asking if she has a formal report regarding the recovered books. Seo confirms the details, explaining that she sent over the data a short while ago and simply wanted to verify it with the machine. In response, the library drone asks if she will share the stored book records using her assistant employee identification. A digital monitor processes the identification details, displaying the official record of an individual named Ethan. The profile picture on the screen shows a formal man with dark lines running down beneath his eyes, clad in a suit and tie. Seo reads the text displayed on the library drone's screen, softly pronouncing the name Ethan aloud. Looking at the terminal with a confused expression, Seo directly asks the library drone what that digital profile is. The machine remains completely silent for a moment. The drone breaks the silence, calmly clarifying that Ethan is its name. Seo flinches back in complete shock, pointing out that the machine does not look anything like the human profile on the monitor. Ignoring her surprise, the library drone states that it will go ahead to verify the data records and instructs her to drink some tea and make herself comfortable, prompting a hesitant agreement from Seo as it rolls away. Seo decides to accept the invitation, calmly stating that she will take its offer to relax. As she steps through the doorway, the office door gently shuts closed behind her. Standing quietly in the office, Ethan turns head slightly as an internal reflection or memory begins to surface where a voice asks what's the matter. The memory reveals the head librarian's office from the past before the disaster. Ethan, appearing as a man in a formal suit, walks up to the large wooden desk to offer a cup of hot tea to a woman seated in the office chair. Working at her terminal, the head librarian looks back with a bright smile, warmly thanking Ethan for being so thoughtful. Meanwhile, the drone unit sits silently in the corner of the room with its broom. Ethan looks down with a concerned expression as he holds a tray and a teacup in his mechanical hands. He points out that working so late into the night is bound to be bad for the head librarian's health. The head librarian smiles softly, reassuring him that she will only be staying up a little longer and offers her thanks. Standing near her desk, Ethan asks if her worries are related to the ongoing plans to expand the underground storage area. The head librarian takes a sip of her tea and somberly admits that she cannot seem to convince the higher-ups, reflecting with a faint smile that they simply do not see the meaning behind preserving books as physical copies. Ethan delivers a completely honest admission regarding the matter. He speaks up to state that he cannot really understand the logic behind her choice himself. He reflects on the nature of information, reasoning that the vast majority of books can easily be stored and viewed entirely as digital data. Because of this efficiency, he internally questions why regular humans choose to fixate so heavily on keeping physical copies. The head librarian lets out a soft chuckle and acknowledges his point, admitting that he might be entirely right about the situation. Holding her teacup warmly, she explains with a gentle smile that for an android like him, the human attachment to physical items is probably especially hard to understand. The head librarian stretches her arms high above her head while sitting at her office desk. Letting out a relaxed sigh, she decides that it is finally time to take a short break from her work. Standing up from her desk chair, the head librarian turns toward Ethan with a warm smile. She suggests that since he is already present in the office, he should join her on a walk. Walking side by side down a long facility corridor, the head librarian reopens their discussion from earlier. She looks up at Ethan and reassures him that his perspective on the matter is completely valid. Looking out across the sprawling cityscape before the disaster, the head librarian contemplates the course of human history. She notes that as times change, new and necessary things are constantly born, while the old and unnecessary ones are discarded. She reasons that the history of human development is simply a history of repeating that continuous process. She continues her thought with a gentle smile, stating that when viewed through that lens, there is nothing strange about people considering the library to be a useless relic of the past. Looking down thoughtfully beside her, Ethan listens to her reasoning and quietly asks why she still fights so hard to protect it. Smiling softly in profile, the head librarian playfully taps the tip of her nose with a finger to begin her explanation. She answers that there are unique elements only a physical copy can provide, offering the scent of the books as an immediate example. The head librarian details the unique sensory experiences of physical copies, mentioning the physical tactile sensation of flipping through the individual paper pages and the specific sound it creates. She reflects that all of these subtle feelings combined are what truly allow a reader to feel the genuine presence of the books. Continuing their walk down the quiet hallway, the head librarian warmly explains to Ethan that this entire physical space containing all of those combined sensory sensations is dearer to her than she can even express. Ethan observes that none of those physical sensations seem to have any logical relation to actually understanding the written contents of the books. The head librarian acknowledges his comment with a soft chuckle, admitting that there are plenty of people who share his viewpoint and noting that he is likely right. She smiles softly, her expression resolute despite the skepticism of others. She firmly states that those seemingly meaningless things are not something she is willing to give up. Turning the conversation, the head librarian looks at Ethan as they walk together. She openly asks him how he truly feels about this facility. Ethan quietly admits that he still has difficulty seeing the practical value of keeping the physical objects, but he prepares to share a deeper thought as the head librarian listens with a patient smile. Standing together at the balcony railing, the two look out over the multi-tiered library hall. Ethan gazes at the towering shelves and large arched windows, softly stating that this specific view feels beautiful to him. The head librarian smiles warmly at his comment, quietly asking if that is really how he feels. She says that simply hearing him say those words is more than enough for her. The head librarian stretches her arm and energetically declares that it is time to get a bit more work done. Ethan follows closely behind her, gently advising her to please get some sleep. She reflects with a soft chuckle that she is sometimes downright jealous of his companion's artificial body. Suddenly, the memory begins to fade away with a static sound. The memory shifts forward to a scene of widespread devastation within the facility. She looks toward her companion and asks if they have successfully managed to retrieve most of the borrowed books in this specific sector. Ethan confirms that they have indeed secured them. The head librarian places a hand over the recovered volumes, somberly reflecting that managing to secure even this many is a true accomplishment given how many books were completely destroyed. Looking forward through her protective gas mask, she notes that the library has fully burned down, leaving just Ethan and herself as the only two librarians left in the world. A shadowy, monstrous figure crouches high on a pile of concrete rubble, pointing a sharp blade straight down at the two survivors. Ethan looks up in sudden shock, his voice filled with dread as he wonders internally how on earth things managed to end up like this. With sudden speed, the creature lunges downward to attack. Sensing the immediate danger, Ethan frantically shouts out for the head librarian and forcefully shoves her back with his arm to get her out of harm's way, catching her completely off guard. In a devastating flash, the attacker slices directly through Ethan's upper body. His left arm and shoulder are violently severed from his torso, exposing mechanical wiring and internal components as his handgun slips away. The head librarian yells out Ethan's name in sheer frustration and panic as the creature attacks. Raising her firearm, she opens fire relentlessly into the dark silhouette of the monster. As the bullets hit the target, Ethan's internal system alerts that critical damage has been sustained from the strike. The head librarian runs forward while frantically calling out for Ethan. Multiple system errors flash across Ethan's visual interface as his internal power breaks down. His voice crackles heavily while attempting to address the head librarian, weakly stating that he is glad she is alright just before his system formally initiates a forced shutdown. A digital notification formally logs that a system reboot has commenced. The view returns to a brightly lit underground workspace, where the head librarian sits at her primary computer terminal. She spins around in her office chair with a look of sudden surprise, calling out Ethan's name as he begins to wake up. The head librarian looks down with a worried expression, noticing that her companion has finally opened his eyes. She lets out a relieved breath and asks Ethan if he can recognize her face. Looking up from below, Ethan slowly processes her presence and recognizes her as the head librarian. Suddenly, the head librarian breaks into a heavy fit of coughing, covering her mouth with her hand. Her face is strained and marked with physical weariness as she tries to look over her companion. Looking at her, Ethan softly wonders aloud if she has somehow gotten taller since they last spoke. Ethan reacts in mild confusion, silently questioning the status of his voice. Noticing his concern, the head librarian looks down soberly with a sad expression and softly offers her deep apologies. She explains the situation to her companion, stating that Ethan's old body was damaged beyond repair. She notes that even just porting over his primary systems into a mechanical unit was almost more than she could manage. Ethan's newly transferred form stands inside the facility room. Looking down, he raises his thin mechanical arms to examine his simple, treaded cleaning robot body. Looking out over a deeply ruined landscape of crumbling city buildings, the head librarian somberly remarks that things are in awful shape out there. Breaking into another cough, she admits that she does not even know if there is anyone else left alive in the world. Pulling her collar slightly away from her weathered neck, she looks back with a weak smile and softly notes that she does not have much time left either. The head librarian somberly notes that she finally managed to fix Ethan's body, but now she is going to be leaving him all alone in this world. She tentatively asks Ethan if he hates her for what she has done to him. Sitting across from her, Ethan responds through his robotic interface, explaining that external changes do not present much of a problem and reasoning that this new body is actually able to work much more efficiently. Hearing his pragmatic response, the head librarian smiles weakly and notes that his words sound exactly like something he would typically say. Ethan reflects on the grim reality of their situation, stating that now all of their work might formally be over. He systematically details that if there are no readers left, then there is no longer any meaning to protecting the collection, and clarifies that if she is gone, there is no meaning left to his own existence either. The head librarian listens to his heavy words in absolute silence, her expression filled with a quiet, fading sadness. She introduces a new perspective, suggesting that one day, someone might follow in their footsteps. Sitting on the floor across from Ethan's treaded mechanical form, she explains that if there is even a single soul left who hungers for knowledge, then there is definitive value in protecting these books. The head librarian seeks her companion's perspective, softly asking Ethan how that specific idea sounds to him. She admits with a weak smile that she lacks the slightest shred of evidence for her theory, but notes that thinking of it that way adds a sense of meaning to everything. Ethan questions if things truly work that way, prompting a soft chuckle from the head librarian as she apologizes for not being able to think of anything better to say. The head librarian addresses Ethan, openly acknowledging her own selfishness. She admits that even though her own life is coming to an end, she simply could not bear the thought of him dying too. Ethan responds to her through his voice, formally accepting her words as his new mission. He reminds her that he is here as the head librarian's assistant and remains alive today because she saved him. Gazing at the grand structure of the library building, Ethan firmly resolves to carry out his lifelong duty. He declares that he will protect the things she wants to protect in her place. She smiles softly, noting that Ethan is truly going to listen to her selfish desire. Speaking through his simple interface, Ethan firmly confirms that she can leave everything to him. With a gentle and peaceful expression, the head librarian lets out a soft chuckle. She reflects that she can finally pass away without any worries remaining in her heart. She places her hand against the side of the mechanical unit to offer a final request, asking her companion to take care of things for her. Immediately afterward, the memory fades completely into a static screen with a loud crackling sound as she softly says Ethan's name one last time. The narrative counts down as a digital screen logs the staggering size of the library drone's mission, displaying that there are 37,943 borrowed books remaining to be collected. Carrying out its primary duty alone, Ethan navigates its small, treaded form down a massive, empty concrete corridor lined with windows. Eventually, Ethan rolls up to a closed metal door at the end of the hall. Ethan extends its thin mechanical arm forward, giving two sharp knocks against a surface. Opening the door to investigate the cluttered room, the library drone discovers a fallen person leaning motionless against a book rack, with blocky crystalline clusters covering the upper torso. He looks closely at the remains of the deceased person, observing the extensive crystallosis growth spreading across the clothing. The system log reveals that the count has dropped, showing 30,943 borrowed books remaining to be collected. Carrying out its rhythmic routine, the library drone raises its mechanical arm to knock twice on another door. Inside the room, the machine finds another motionless body covered in blocky crystalline growths, and it uses its thin claws to retrieve a book from the area. The ongoing mission continues as the digital display updates to 24,281 remaining books. The library drone repeats its protocol, knocking deliberately on a closed wooden door. Moving past the threshold, the machine navigates through a heavily cluttered room filled with massive piles of scattered volumes and a crystalline-covered casualty to search the storage shelves. The database systematically logs the steady progress, counting down to 11,220 books and eventually dropping to 4,891. The library drone knocks on a final handle-equipped door, scans a severely ruined brick chamber, and uses its mechanical limb to pull a damaged piece of material from a wall. The long journey brings the library drone down to a desolate residential sector. Moving past wide windows inside an empty, cracked hallway, the small treaded machine arrives before a weathered door. Ethan follows his routine protocol and raises his segmented mechanical arm to knock deliberately against the door. After a heavy, silent pause stretches out, he knocks a second time. The heavy metal door slowly creaks open into the dark space. As light pours across his metallic frame, a clear shadow forms against Ethan's body, revealing the silhouette of a person standing at the entrance. Standing at the threshold of the open doorway, Seo looks straight out with wide, calm eyes. The perspective returns to the quiet room where a simple ceramic teacup rests on its saucer. Seo continues her explanation to Ethan, stating that she has got a mission of her own to fulfill. She continues to detail her upcoming journey, explaining that she will be traveling through this district for a while, going around to explore various different areas. Seo points out that there might be unreturned books hidden away in some of the places she visits. She emphasizes that above all else. She explains that there is still meaning in protecting this place, and firmly resolves that she wants to help Ethan accomplish that goal. The flash of memory ends as the static fades away, returning back to the reality of the present world. Making a clicking noise on the concrete floor, the library drone rolls steadily forward through the ruined, sunlit corridor. The library drone rolls steadily along the high balcony of the massive, ruined cathedral hall. Below, broken doors and crumbling arched windows stand open to the desolate landscape outside, casting long shadows across the empty space where rows of book racks once stood. With a continuous squeaking sound from its treads, the library drone navigates down a plain, empty corridor inside the facility. It approaches a large automated door, which begins to slide open. Inside the room, a memory or a quiet reflection surfaces as the head librarian appears, holding a small white teacup. Sitting calmly, she takes a gentle sip from her cup while quietly reading through the pages of a book. Seo sits quietly in the room, holding her teacup steady in her hand. She looks off to the side with a slightly alert and curious expression as she hears someone approaching. It was Ethan's imagination. I guess he has emotion too. Seo smiles warmly from her seat at the table and welcomes the librarian back. Seo notices his deep silence and addresses the library drone directly, asking if there is something wrong. Ethan breaks his silence by telling Seo that she can simply call him by his name. Hearing this personal statement, Seo looks up with a touch of surprise in her wide eyes. Turning around on his treads, Ethan announces that he will go and fetch her some more tea. Seo watches him roll away from the table and softly offers her gratitude. Sitting calmly beside her small companion, Ku, she looks forward with a gentle smile.